The Author's POV. Chapter 21, Black Market, 1. Late night, Friday. I never would have predicted finding myself in such a place only a week after reincarnating into this world. The Black Market. The place that resembled the demon world the most in the human domain. A world separate from where laws and morals exist, and the only place where villains and heroes could coexist. That was where I was currently at. Taking the air train all the way to the outer edge of Ashen City, I quickly dropped off on the second last stop and headed towards an obscure location. Making sure the mask I was wearing was tightly secured, I found myself in front of a large metal door. When entering the black market, wearing a mask was compulsory so that each guest could keep their identity hidden. On the off chance that government agents managed to infiltrate the black market, they wouldn't be able to track you down. Bam. 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 Knocking on the door 3 times, I patiently waited. Clang. Shortly after, 2 burly individuals wearing neat suits emerged from behind the door and scanned my body a couple of times. Feeling their gaze on me, my back started to drench in a cold sweat. Their individual rank is definitely C or higher. I thought as I felt the immense pressure oozing out from their body. Turning his head towards the individual to the left, the burly individual on the right nodded and spoke with a deep voice. "What might you be here for? I heard from a passing bird that you were looking for volunteers." "We are indeed looking for a volunteer. Which job are you looking to volunteer for?" "I heard that you guys needed someone to paint your walls." "We only have 4 paints, blue, black, pink and white. Which one do you think would be the most adequate for our walls?" Although I may have not seen what you needed to paint, I believe blue would look best in anything. Turning their faces to face each other, the 2 burly individuals nodded to each other and signaled for me to enter. Letting out a sigh of relief, I followed the 2 of them along a dark and narrow passage. There were 2 ways for an individual to enter the black market. One was through a recommendation letter given by a higher-up in the black market, or 2 by knowing the secret code. The secret code was split into 3 different segments, where each new segment was a continuation of the previous one. In my case, the first segment was, "What might you be here for?" for which the word volunteer was used to gain access to the next segment. This pattern repeats 3 times until the guards could confirm the authenticity of the guest who was trying to come in. In this way, the chances of inspectors infiltrating into the black market diminished by a large margin. Actually, this wasn't really necessary as inspectors were not actually against the idea of a black market. Just as things have their disadvantages, they also had their advantages. Being the central hub for both heroes and villains, vital information could be gathered from information brokers which could, in turn, help government agents pry into some of the villains' plans. Information brokers were essentially individuals or an organization which specialized in sharing information for a price. Depending on the type of information, the higher the price for the information. Fortunately in my case, as I was the author, I basically knew most of the things the information brokers knew. If I wanted to, I could disclose some important information and make some serious cash, but that would probably be a stupid idea as it could lead to me getting attention and also potentially changing the plotline of the story. And with the information that I knew, I was easily able to gain access to the black market, since I was the one who created the password. But I do have to say, this experience was extremely nerve-wracking. If this had not been the only method I could have used to gain access to dungeons, I would have never have come here. Actually, finding a dungeon wasn't the only reason why I headed to the black market. There was another reason. I was in urgent need of a broker. Do you think I would stupidly short CB and buy a bunch of WV stock without hiding my identity? Once Thobias dies a month from now, the prime suspect would be the one guy who days before his death bets on C.B's crash and W.V's rise. Tell me if that's not suspicious. Although Silent Creeper was officially identified as the killer, the main culprit could be someone else, as at the end of the day Silent Creeper could have just been hired to do the job. The man behind the attack was the true mastermind behind this, not Silent Creeper, and the police already knew this. Stupidly investing in C.B and WV could result in my own demise. Hence why I needed a broker. A broker was an intermediary who would anonymously deal with my investments without asking any questions regarding who I was and why I was doing this. Since the black market was filled with both villains and heroes, the brokers were used to situations like mine. Which was exactly what I wanted since I didn't want to gather unnecessary attention towards myself. Fortunately for me, as I once again boast about the fact that I was the author of the novel, know the right person for the job. We're here. Clang. Opening a similarly large metal door to the one at the entrance, the two burly men stepped aside and allowed me to get a clear view of what was behind the door. How should I describe this? It was a completely different scene than what someone would have expected when hearing the word black market. When you imaged how a black market would be, you would instantly think of words like filthy, dangerous, dirty, or anything that was synonymous with unpleasant. However, expectations and reality often do mix up, and this black market looked exactly like a night market. Vendors who were selling their goods in their respective stalls were neatly lined up in rows that I could see no end of. If not for the fact that all the customers were wearing masks to hide their identities, someone could have easily mistaken this as your regular night market. A huge opening appeared on the ceiling, allowing the moonlight to penetrate the market, enveloping the market with a sense of tranquility. The lights from the lamps brightly illuminated two roads, allowing for a clearer view of the goods in the market. It was probably the best-looking black market you could find out there. Actually, I designed the black market to be like this since I wanted to spice things up a bit. But even then, this was incredible. I guess words weren't enough to describe this place. Walking along the road and passing by the numerous stalls, I could see a wide variety of products being sold. From potions to artifacts, all sorts of products that I urgently needed were being displayed right before me. It took me a great deal of willpower to stop myself from purchasing any of them. Right now I had a goal to accomplish. Making my way towards a secluded spot in the black market, I quickly went towards a rather inconspicuous-looking wooden bench and sat down. Sitting there with my head down, I patiently waited for 5 minutes. Precisely after 5 minutes had passed, a black-hooded individual sat next to me, to which I nodded my head without turning it. "How may we, the Lost Reapers, be of service to you?" "I need a broker." "What type?" "Codename Small Snake." There was a slight pause in our conversation after I directly mentioned the name of the broker that I wanted. Although the hood covered the features of the individual who I was talking to, I could vaguely feel that underneath the hood his brows were tightly knit in a frown. It wasn't because I requested a big individual, but rather, an almost unknown one. Because there were so many employees working in Lost Reapers, it was hard to keep track of who was who. Small Snake was what you called a hidden treasure. Someone that was capable yet unknown. Well, that was until now. It was very understandable for the hooded figure to have trouble remembering who Small Snake was. He was an unknown character until the later half of the novel. In the novel, codename Small Snake interacts with Kevin a couple of times before forming some sort of business relationship with him. From there, Kevin was able to quickly see how capable of an individual, codename Small Snake, was. Not only was he great at hiding his traces when carrying a transaction, but he also had many connections with certain suppliers that could provide Small Snake with quality ingredients such as Luxitin, an incredibly rare flower that grows in the depth of the Elven territory, for below market prices. His connection later proved to be extremely useful to Kevin, who was in dire need of certain rare ingredients. "Are you sure about your request?" "Certain." Surprised by my firm response, the hooded figure let out a small sigh and stood up. "Codename Small Snake shall be here shortly. May we hope our services satisfy your need." "Thank you." And just like that, the hooded figure disappeared just as fast as he had appeared. 20 minutes after the hooded figure departed, I heard light footsteps approaching my location. Sitting down next to me like the hooded figure had previously done, a lanky-looking youth that had his features hidden beneath a white mask sat next to me. "Codename Small Snake at your service, how may I help you?" Contrary to his appearance, Small Snake's voice was quite deep, which slightly surprised me, but not for long, as I managed to quickly regain my composure. "I want you to be my broker. My commission is 5% on all profits, and my payment is 10% of the investment." Without skipping a beat, Small Snake told me his terms. "Also, depending on how much you wish to invest, the terms of the deal may change." "Okay." Taking out my hand, I extended it to him, gesturing to him that I had agreed with his terms. My straightforwardness caused Small Snake to be slightly taken back. He had originally expected the person before him to complain and grumble at the unreasonable demands. But contrary to his expectations, he agreed immediately. Moreover, he seemed rather confident in his abilities, like he was sure that he would be able to carry out his request. Small Snake was a capable individual. In fact, he could have been considered a top-class broker. However, because his demands were so high, he had never had a customer before. When he first joined the Lost Reapers, he had expected requests to flood in non-stop and that he would constantly be busy with demands. But contrary to his expectations, 2 months after entering the Lost Reapers, he still had not served a single customer. Not only that, all the customers that he managed to talk to always grumbled about his insanely high rates or preferred to go towards more senior colleagues who were more reputable than himself. This resulted in his talent being stagnant and hidden until Kevin finally found him. Well, I guess I was the one who found him this time. In order for me not to mess too much with the storyline, I'll build a solid relationship with Small Snake and make him interact with Kevin when the time was right. Staring at the figure before him whose features were covered by a mask, Small Snake fell into deep thought. This could potentially be his big break. If he were to successfully complete this deal and show off his capabilities, he could finally attract more customers to him. Although his rates were high, there was a specific reason for this. His connections and skills were top-notch. Not only was he capable of making it almost impossible for inspectors or individuals to trace his movements, but his connections were also some of the best in the world. If not for the fact that he was currently being hunted by certain individuals, he would have never have come to work for Lost Reapers. In the end, after hesitating a little bit, Small Snake finally stretched his hand out and firmly shook mine. Feeling the large hand which marked the first deal he had ever agreed on, Small Snake decided there and then that he will do his absolute best to accomplish whatever his first customer desired. The Author's POV. Chapter 22, Black Market, 2. Everything is starting to make sense now. Hearing Ren's investment plan, Small Snake's face couldn't help but scrunch up in frustration. It was nothing short of idiotic. He was also beginning to doubt the reason as to why he was chosen. At first, he thought it may have been because he had somehow heard about his outstanding talent, but now he was starting to believe it was because no other broker wanted to work with him. Shorting C.B Pharmaceuticals, a behemoth in the pharmaceutical industry, and investing in W.V stock. From a sane person's point of view, this was an investment that had no basis to back up its claim. With CB's current performance, the stock was expected to rise even further. Moreover, with his connections, he could tell beforehand if something was going on within the company. But there were no signs of abnormality within CB, suggesting that this was an investment that had no foundation behind it. What was even more confusing was the fact that he needed to employ the service of a black market broker for this kind of deal. Black market brokers were hired when one wanted to hide their identity from the prying eyes of the world when making an investment. This was usually done so that the client could avoid government agents' pursuit. But that was only applicable to criminals. Is he perhaps going to kill someone important? Small Snake thought as he stared at his employer up and down. He firmly doubted it. Judging from his demeanor and strength, he was in no way a rich second-generation kid, plus he roughly estimated that his contractor's strength was around GF rank. There was simply no way he could kill anyone important enough to warrant a stock fluctuation. Not with his meager amount of strength. Was he perhaps trying to hide his identity because he's too embarrassed to publicly go through with his own deal? Small Snake thought as he bitterly shook his head. From what he could tell, this was probably the most plausible hypothesis he could come up with. I mean, no matter how Small Snake looked at it, his client was neither some big shot nor someone strong enough to assassinate an important figure. What irked him the most about this deal was how confident his employer was. His demeanor was like that of someone who was sure to make money out of this nonsensical deal. Was he delusional? No matter how Small Snake looked at it, this deal was simply stupid. Yet, deep within his heart, maybe just maybe, he hoped for his client to be right. Well, who knows, maybe he'll really be right. Small Snake thought as he couldn't help but lightly chuckle at the almost impossible scenario. Rather than just question, it was better to just perform as the client wished. Sometimes you just might be in for a surprise. Moreover, the main policies employed by all Lost Reapers employees were: never ask questions about client identity. Never ask questions about client action. Therefore, even if he wanted to convince his client against doing such investment, he couldn't, as it was Lost Reapers' policy to not question the client's decision. Letting out a sigh underneath his mask, Small Snake quickly went through his terms and signed it. At least he was getting paid for his work. It was just a bummer to see his first client lose so much money. Seeing Small Snake's subtle actions, I couldn't help but laugh. Although he was wearing a mask, his expressions could be read like an open book. Just the way he flinched when he heard about the deal, and how his shoulders dropped at the realization that he was dealing with a stupid client was so easy to read. I'll let him be for now, he'll eventually thank me later. I thought to myself as I enjoyed watching his crestfallen expression. So how much are you planning on investing? For now I have about 10,000 I can invest, but I'm planning on investing at least 5 times that. So around 50,000 . Maybe less. Who knows, around that range though. Small Snake was already starting to shed tears beneath his mask. What kind of small-time investment was this? 10,000 U. 50,000 U. With this, Small Snake could confirm that he wasn't some second-generation rich kid that loved throwing away money. With such a meager amount, even if you somehow predicted correctly, the amount you would make would at most be in the triple digits. What was the point of commissioning him if you were only planning on investing so little? Reminding himself of the Lost Reapers rules, Small Snake resigned himself to the harsh reality. Okay, so do you have the money with you now? No, I only have about 10,000 U with me. Okay, so when will you invest? Once I make enough, I guess. Pardon. Once I make more money. From this point on, Small Snake was able to deduce one thing about the identity of his employer. He was a villain. A black-hearted villain that loved to make hard-working employees like him suffer. Seeing Small Snake's drooping figure, I barely managed to hold back my laughter. I may have gone a bit overboard, but I really enjoyed teasing him. Weakly walking towards his chair, Small Snake sat down while holding his head in despair. How a re you plan ing on Mac ing the moan y. He weakly said as he tried his best to regain his composure. Oh, I'm gonna go to a dungeon and, Clang. Falling down from his chair, Small Snake could vividly see his life flash before his eyes. What have I done to deserve this? Turning my body around, I could barely keep my laughter in check. My whole body started shaking uncontrollably as a consequence of me trying to hold back my laughter. This was probably the funniest reaction I had ever seen in my life. It took a solid hour for Small Snake to regain his composure, but his current demeanor was a far cry from when I had just met him. He resembled a black company employee who had resigned himself to his fate. Staring at his lifeless expression, I slightly smiled. Although Small Snake was very competent, the main reason that propelled me into contacting him was not his outstanding set of skills, but rather his devotion to the job. He was the type of person that took every job seriously. Therefore, no matter how absurd the request was, once accepted, he would always try to accomplish it the best way he possibly could. Moreover, he was someone that could keep his mouth shut. Even if he was tied down to a chair and endlessly tortured, his mouth would never waver. That was how reliable of a person he was. Alright, let's not dwell on the specifics of the deal. You just have to trust me. Staring at me for a couple of seconds, Small Snake sighed and finally came to terms with my absurd financial plan. Fine, I'm in no position to talk anyways. Actually, I still need your help. Warily glancing at me, Small Snake switched back into his business demeanor. What other service do you require from me? I need a monster corpse broker. So I guess you weren't joking when you mentioned the word dungeon previously. Nodding my head, I continued explaining my plan. Don't worry, I'll probably be safe. Moreover, I'm only going to go to an F-rank dungeon, which shouldn't be too difficult. What I need your help with is with handling the corpses which I will bring back from the dungeon. Nodding his head, Small Snake took out a piece of paper and started scribbling on it. F-rank dungeon, the current market rate is around 1,000 U per normal monster corpse, and 5,000 U for boss monsters. If you consider the conditions at which the corpse is presented, the payment can increase. Moreover, if by some crazy chance you manage to acquire an F-rank monster core, you can very easily sell that for 100,000 U depending on its size. Turning his head towards where I was standing, Small Snake mind quickly raced as he slowly formulated a plan for me. From what you've told me, you wanted to at least invest 50,000 U. Considering that you have 10,000 of the 50,000 U you are planning to invest, you would approximately need 40,000 U. If you want to earn that much in an F-rank dungeon, then you must either kill 40 F-rank monsters, 8 bosses, or find an F-rank core, which would leave plenty left to spare. Furrowing his brows underneath his mask, Small Snake handed me the paper in which he had calculated the possible things I needed to do in order to raise 40,000 U. This is a simple layout of the things you need to do to raise that much money. Moreover, that is if we are excluding dungeon entrance fees, commissions, and the cost of paying for your equipment. Staring deeply at me, Small Snake asked, "Are you sure about this?" Grinning, I sat in front of him and said, "If I wasn't sure about this, I wouldn't have come here." After staring at me for a solid minute, Small Snake nodded his head and stood up. "I don't know where your confidence comes from, but since you're my first and only client, I will help you the best that I possibly can. Couldn't ask for more." Similarly standing up, I shook his hand. All right, I guess we have a deal. Soon after parting ways with Small Snake, I made my way towards the black market stalls. Now that I had some time for myself, I could take a proper look at the things available for sale in the black market. Taking out a small black card that Small Snake gave me after we finalized our deal, I quickly went towards the entrance of the black market where a large metal door stood. Quickly taking out 8,000 U from my pocket, I headed in the direction of where the door was. Besides the large metal door, stood a neat black stall that had a relatively long queue. Arriving at the stall, I patiently waited in line for approximately 15 minutes before a sales employee quickly went to greet me at the register. Taking the black card out, I handed the card plus 8,000 U to the employee. The black card I was currently holding was an exclusive card that could only be used in the black market and was the main payment method used when purchasing things on the black market. What the employee was doing was converting the cash I gave to him into a cryptocurrency specifically made only for the black market. Although transactions through cash were generally safe, it was not very efficient when dealing with transactions that dealt with large figures. By creating a cryptocurrency, the black market was able to swiftly deal with several problems at the same time. 1. Since crypto was untraceable, it ensured safe transactions. 2. And most importantly, allowed the black market to act as an intermediary during the transactions. People tended to forget this when entering the black market. But this place was flooded with villains. Villains were essentially scums of society that held no regard for rules or morality. If there was no one to keep them in check, they could have probably forced someone to make a deal or even worse given them fake money. Therefore, with the black card system, it became much easier to trade and check if there was any fraud taking place in the transaction. Because they were using the black market cryptocurrency, fake money could not be used as the black market currency was only available here. This way, when doing transactions here, people didn't need to be wary of potential scams. And if by any chance someone was indeed trying to commit a scam, the black market forces would swiftly deal with them. How much would you like to recharge? 8,000 U please. Alright, please wait a moment. Placing my money inside of a black box, the sales employee pressed a button and patiently waited a couple of seconds. Ding. After the black box ringed, signaling that it was done with whatever it was doing, the employee took my card and placed it on top of the box. Okay, everything is ready, please enjoy yourself. Handing me my card back, the sales employee smiled and started serving the next client. Taking my card, I quickly went to look at the never-ending rows of stalls. It's time to go shopping. The Author's POV. Chapter 23, Black Market, 3. Seeing the numerous people going to and fro between each stall, I couldn't help but feel my heart race at the extensive number of goods that shone brightly under the street lights. Each one looked more tempting than the other. Going through each stall one by one, I made a mental note of the things that seemed interesting. This way, once I went through the majority of the stalls, I could decide which thing I needed to buy and which thing I didn't. Since I was planning on venturing inside of a dungeon, I require several things. Arriving at a stall, I went forward and picked up a slim necklace that had a purple stone imbued in it. Name, Necklace of Tranquility. Type, Artifact. Rank, G. Use, allows wearer to have better sleep. Description, artifact created by an unknown blacksmith. With the aid of the status window, I could see the detail of each artifact I touched, making it easier for me to look for what I wanted. Looking at the necklace in my hand, I thought, this could indeed be useful, as sleeping inside of a dungeon can be challenging. Dungeons were essentially portals that connected Earth to the demon world. Their harsh environment means that only monsters or strong individuals could survive inside of them. With its harsh conditions, one needs, alongside good equipment, to be in their best possible shape. If one lacked sleep, then it became much harder for them to continue venturing inside of the dungeon as a sleep-deprived person's reaction time becomes slower. Thus, this necklace could definitely be of good use inside of dungeons. Excuse me. Yes, how may I help you? Calling out the stall owner, who wore a black hood to hide his features. I pointed at the necklace in my hand and asked, how much is this? Carefully inspecting the necklace in my hands, the stall owner paused for a second before saying, that necklace. 3,000 U. Placing the necklace down, I went to the next stall. Sleeping was for the weak. Slower reaction time. Heh, I say to hell with that. 3,000 U. My word. Talk about daylight robbery. Although the effect was good, there's no way a G-rank artifact was worth that much. Trying my best to forget about this accident, I ventured deeper into the market. As I was walking, I remembered the number of certain stalls that had some interesting items up for sale. Because of my limited budget, I needed to be careful when buying stuff. Right now, more than anything else, I needed a sword. Because for obvious reasons I couldn't bring the school's katana with me. I had no choice but to look for a new sword. Moreover, I also needed to buy some sort of dimensional storage that could help me store the corpses of the monsters that I killed. If not, how was I supposed to bring back the corpses of all the monsters I killed? Unlike the MC who has a system that comes with an enormous storage space, I didn't have such privilege. Fortunately for me, the black market was filled with such items. Plus, if I was lucky enough, I might get some good deals. Well, not so much for dimensional storages as their price was fairly inflexible. The bigger the storage provided, the more expensive the artifact would become. And since I was short on money, I probably couldn't afford to buy myself a high-end storage device. In fact, even purchasing a low-end one was challenging for me with my current budget. If I couldn't purchase one, I would have to literally walk back to the entrance of the dungeon and drop the monster bodies in front of the gate. That would be total hell. Plus, since I would most likely not be the only one entering the dungeon, I risked the possibility of getting my spoils stolen. In short, dimensional storage was a must. Arriving before a weapon stall that I had previously passed by, I quietly looked through their sword section. Various swords were neatly displayed in the stall, allowing me to get a clearer view of how they looked like. Each sword and weapon had a different brand imprinted on the sheath or body of the weapon. This was because different weapons were forged by different blacksmiths. The weapons created by famous blacksmiths could be considered the blacksmith's brand, and branded goods were naturally expensive. The price was also not something normal people could afford, especially for someone as poor as me. But I still decided to test my luck. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a sword that perfectly fit my style and didn't cost much. Excuse me. Calling out the shop owner, I pointed at a slim sword that looked both robust and light at the same time. Although it wasn't a katana, the keiki style wasn't a sword art that could only explicitly be practiced by a katana. All it required was a slim and firm sword that could move at incredible speeds without breaking. Sure. Nodding his head, the stall owner went to the back and picked up the sword. Handing it to me, I quietly admired the sword. A slim straight blade with black aesthetic patterns deeply etched on the main body of the blade, quietly rested on the palm of my hands. It had no guard, and unlike the katana which lightly curves, this sword was straight. Carefully tracing my fingers along the edge of the blade, I could feel incredible sharpness coming from the sword that made it seem like it could cut anything. Cool. Twitching my brows for a second, I quietly looked down at my finger which was now bleeding. This is a fine sword, I thought, as I grabbed a napkin and wiped my finger. Even after healing my wound with some light ointment, I could still feel a stinging sensation coming from the finger that got cut. This sword was incredibly good. Well, compared to the Academy's katana, this was not as good, but that was simply because better materials were used when forging the weapon. However, although the Academy's weapons were good, they were in fact not artifacts. They were specifically made for training, and therefore the Academy deemed it unnecessary for the training equipment to be artifacts. With regular weapons, the school could more or less keep the students in check, but as artifacts contained certain powers, the risk of injury during a duel would drastically increase. Therefore, aside from their exceptional firmness and low density, the Academy weapons did not have any special effects. Although they were indeed top-of-the-line swords, they would still lose out against a similarly durable artifact. Also, since the Academy's weapons weren't artifacts, their stats were unknown. Name: Silver Edge. Type: Artifact. Rank: F. Use: an extremely sharp sword that can easily cut through the toughest metal. Description: artifact that was found inside of the demon world, and is a sword that had previously been used to slay several demons. Surprisingly, the sword was not made by a famous blacksmith but was actually found inside of a dungeon. Looking at its clean body, I instantly knew that this was a refurbished sword. May I try it? Turning my head towards the shop owner, I saw him shake his head at my question. Well, fair enough. I was careless as well. I asked without thinking, if by accident someone recognized the sword art I was using, a massive headache would be coming my way. Does it have a scabbard? Feeling the blade in my hand, even though I couldn't try it, I could feel the sword being really compatible with the keiki style. Not only was it light, but it was also extremely durable. Yes. Nodding, the shop owner went to the back and took a black rectangular scabbard. Placing the sword inside of the scabbard, I nodded satisfactorily. Because the sword did not have a guard, the sword neatly fitted the scabbard, making it look like I had a long black stick. It sort of looked futuristic. Low-key, just the way I like it. How much is this? 5,999 U. Looking at the sword that rested on the side of my hip, I hesitated for a second before handing him my black card. Thank you for your purchase. Yeah. Leaving the store with a new sword and 6,000 U down, I couldn't help but grumble at the price. I just used 75% of my budget on a sword. This means that I only had 2,001 U left within my card. Now I had to be especially careful about what I purchased next, as my budget has become even more constricted. Stopping for a moment, I thought for a while and decided to go to a stall which I had previously passed. The stall I was going to was a stall that only sold dimensional storage type tools, which was essential for me alongside my sword. The selling of dimensional storage type tools was actually illegal. That was because, when dimensional storages were first introduced, a lot of copycats tried to imitate their technology. This resulted in disastrous events where out of nowhere the tool would break, due to their poor quality, and as a result of this, a lot of people got injured or even died. It had to be noted that dimensional storages dealt with the laws of space and time, meaning that the consequences of them breaking was disastrous. At a certain point, it became so bad that the central government illegalized the production of dimensional storages and only allowed certain licensed individuals to produce them. Because of this, the prices for dimensional storage inflated and became much higher than their production cost. But fortunately for me, as I was in the black market, the prices were far lower than for what I could get them outside. It didn't take long for me to arrive at my destination. Looking at the stall that sold things like storage rings, storage bags, storage pouch, etc., I first looked at the prices. Since prices were based on the storage space dimension, with only 2,000 U remaining, I could only afford 25 cubic meters worth of space. Storage dimension started at 5 cubic meters for 300 U and increased a further 300 U for every additional 5 cubic meters added. In my case, since I wanted to purchase a 25 cubic meter storage device, the total price was around 1,500 U. It came out at a total of 1,800 U though, as I decided to purchase the storage device in the form of a bracelet. Name, storage bracelet, 25 cubic meters. Type, artifact. Rank, G. Use, a device that stores items inside of dimensional space. Description, common artifact which was crafted by a low-rank blacksmith. Since storage devices have many forms, such as bags, pouches, rings and etc., the smaller the medium was, the more expensive the price was. In my case, since I choose to go with a bracelet instead of a bag, I paid an extra 300 U, totaling the price at 1,800 U. Looking at the black leather bracelet that rested on my wrist, I nodded satisfactorily. If one didn't look carefully, they would think this was just a regular bracelet. It was best to disguise dimensional storages, as it could potentially be a target for thieves or people looking to make easy cash by robbing someone. Since no one knew what went inside of dungeons, as there were no cameras, nobody could verify if someone had been robbed or killed inside of a dungeon. Dungeons were basically lawless zones, where be it human or monster, they could all be your enemy. It was always best to keep a low profile. Fortunately, they were password protected, meaning that apart from me, no one could access them. Sort of served as a deterrent against thieves. Since I only had 200 U left on my card, I decided to spend the rest of my money on some potions such as the Stamina Recovery Potion and Mana Recovery Potion. Then when I felt like I had enough potions, I proceeded to spend the rest of my money on some ointments which I would need in case of flesh wounds. Because they were relatively low-quality potions, I managed to buy everything I needed with my 200 U remaining. Satisfied with what I got, I decided to head towards Dungeon Seekers, the place where I could get access to dungeons. An organization that was worth over 1 trillion U, and was one of the main forces operating in the black market. It could be said that the main reason people entered the black market was not because of the illegal goods and services that were being sold, but because of dungeon seekers. Because guilds tend to monopolize dungeons, not allowing external parties into them, people who seek to become stronger or strike it rich and were not part of a guild have no choice but to come here. Since dungeon seekers allowed access to anyone, whether they were heroes or villains, people from all over the world came here. Moreover, the entrance fee and commission proposed by dungeon seekers were not outrageous, which in turn made this place even more popular amongst the general population. It could be said that without dungeon seekers, the black market wouldn't have been as popular as it was now. The author's POV. Chapter 24, Black Market, 4. Arriving in front of another metal door that seemed more secure and robust than the one that led to the black market, I knocked once. Bam. On the right side of the door, a small compartment opened up to which I placed my black card. Vroom. As soon as I placed my card, green light emerged from the bottom of the compartment enveloping my card. Die. A couple of seconds after the green light disappeared, I heard the sound of a ring coming from the compartment indicating to me that the scan was complete. Taking my card back, the metal door started rumbling before slowly opening up. Vam. Entering the building, I was instantly stunned. A luxuriously decorated hall, where at the front stood a stunning reception counter made of a mixture of wood and marble. Various receptionists tended the guest from behind the counter, and a faint citrusy smell lingered in the air. Because Kevin had never been here in the novel, it was also my first time knowing how this place looked like. Words couldn't even come close to describe how a place actually looked like in real life, as things such as the smell, the sounds, and the atmosphere always tended to be hard to conceptualize in words. You could get a general idea of how a place looked like, but it would never be the same as in real life. Every time I came to a new place, I became speechless on how different the place was compared to what I had written. In this case, even though I had Northwest idea how this place would look like, I was still momentarily overwhelmed by this place's grandeur. It resembled a palace created for the king of an empire. Clean white marble floor, silky red carpets, gold-coated lamps, neatly sculpted desks, this place had everything. This was what true luxury looked like. Arriving at the front desk of the reception, I went towards a clerk on the right side of the reception desk. "Welcome to Dungeon Seekers, how may we help you?" "I'm looking to enter a dungeon." Smiling at my reply, the receptionist took a small tablet out and presented it to me. "These are all the available dungeons that we have at the moment." Scrolling through the tablet, I could see a large list of dungeons. Each dungeon had a red and green circle around them, indicating whether they were available or not. Each dungeon had a limit on how many people could enter, and if the limit was not respected, the dungeon would destabilize, resulting in a potential desync. A desync was essentially a phenomenon where a dungeon would lose its connection to the human world. Once a dungeon lost its connection to the human world, it essentially returned to being a part of the demon world. Since dungeon seekers knew this, they made sure that the limit was never broken by always leaving one slot open. We currently have 3 operating G-rank dungeons, 6 F-rank dungeons, 18 D-rank dungeons, 11 C-rank dungeons, 13 B-rank dungeons, and lastly 4 A-rank dungeons. Seeing the endless amount of dungeons available, I was left speechless. The number of dungeons they were hiding was enough to make people wonder how the government still hasn't done anything. Actually, considering their wealth and influence, even if the central government wanted to do something, I doubt they'd be able to hurt Dungeon seekers. That was unless they wanted to start a full-blown war, which no one desired. Taking the tablet, I quickly went through the list for F-rank dungeons. F-rank, Kuru's Barracks. Description: directly spawns contractor inside of Demon Army Barracks. Price: 15% of contractor loot plus entrance fee of 500 U. F-rank, Blood Sea. Description: directly spawns contractor in an oceanic environment filled with bloodthirsty sea creatures. Price: 15% of contractor loot plus entrance fee of 500 U. F-rank, Red Desolation. Description: directly spawns contractors in desert-like terrain that is scarce in water and food sources. Price: 11% of contractor loot plus entrance fee of 500 U. F-rank, Miasma Mountains. Description: directly spawns contractor on top of the high mountain range covered with highly toxic miasma. Price: 8% of contractor loot plus entrance fee of 500 U. F-rank, Forest of Greed. Description: directly spawns contractors inside a forest that tempts prey by creating illusions of their innermost desire. Price: 17% of contractor loot plus entrance fee of 500 U. F-rank, Earth's Wrath. Description: directly spawns contractor near a volcanic area, where temperatures can reach as high as 100 degrees Celsius. Price: 13% of contractor loot plus entrance fee of 500 U. equals 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 equals. What should I choose? Seeing the list of F-rank dungeons, I monetarily paused to think about which one to choose out of all of them. Blood Sea was out of the question as I didn't bring any waterproof equipment with me. Miasma Mountains was simply too dangerous, and I didn't have poison resistance potions with me. Forest of Greed had a 17% clause, where I would have to pay 17% of all profits gained from the dungeon. That was a tad bit too high for my standards. So that was also out of the question. This leaves me with Earth's Wrath, Red Desolation, and Kuru's Barracks. Looking alternatively at the three options before me, after contemplating for a while I decided to go with Red Desolation. It had the lowest contractor clause of 11% and the food and water shortage should pose no problem to me who has just bought a dimensional bracelet. I will go with Red Desolation. Very well, here's a contract you will need to sign before we can finalize our deal. Handing me a 3-page long contract, I patiently looked through the contents. In short, before entering a dungeon they will check the equipment that I will bring inside so that no misunderstandings can arise when I exit the dungeon and report my gains. When exiting a dungeon the staff will do a strict check on the items and things I will bring out so that no false reports were made when paying the contractor clause. A 500 U entrance fee was to be paid up front, accompanied by a 1000 U deposit. The maximum time a person could stay inside of a dungeon was 30 days. If the person did not come out by the designated time, a specialized squad will directly enter the dungeon and forcefully drag you out. Lastly, the contractor could, in case of emergencies, call for a support team that will come as soon as possible to aid them if they were in any danger. The result of calling a support team resulted in the loss of the deposit. Seeing the content, I nodded satisfactorily and signed it. There was nothing that I was particularly against. They were rules that tried to be as fair as possible. Thank you very much. Smiling, the receptionist took the paper and we finalized the payment. Please follow me. After I paid a total of 1500 U, deposit plus entrance fee, I was escorted to a large waiting room. Guest 5077684, Gate 756. Looking at the piece of paper that I had received once I completed the payment, I neatly folded it and placed it in my pocket. This was my dungeon ticket, better not lose it. Inside the room, there were several individuals, who just like me, were waiting to enter the dungeon. Several waiters were walking and serving food and drinks to the people present inside of the waiting room. Glancing around for a couple of seconds, I went towards a secluded area that had fewer people and sat down. If I said I wasn't nervous, I'd be lying. So far, my first week in this world has been smooth sailing. Aside from a few ups and downs here and there in the academy, everything that I wanted to achieve I achieved. The cakey style, the seed of limit, even the VR test was successful as I managed to complete the extra task. Everything that I wanted to accomplish was completed flawlessly. But that meant nothing. Don't let the achievements get to your head. I repeatedly told myself, as I was just about to enter the dungeon. My small achievements shouldn't be something that I should take to heart. I shouldn't become arrogant. Just because everything was going my way didn't mean that everything else was going to be smooth sailing. Facing the dungeon, which I had never been to before, I should never let my guard down. No matter how well things were going for me, a slight mistake could cost me my life. Arrogance was the best recipe for failure. As I was self-reflecting, I tried adjusting my mindset. When going inside of a dungeon, where there was a high mortality rate, one must not go in there thinking that everything would be alright and no danger would befall them. That was not called confidence, it was called stupidity. In the face of potential danger, one must humble themselves and make sure to give it their all so that one doesn't get caught off guard. Guest 5077684, please step forward. Hearing my number, I stood up and went towards the person who called for my name. Wearing a nice black butler outfit, like most of the male employees working here, the man led me towards a large door. D. 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 Shaw. Just before we entered the door, the employee pressed 6 keycodes on the lock of the door and then proceeded to scan his eye. Clang. After a brief pause, the door opened by itself, allowing me to see what was behind it. I was instantly left speechless. I was so overwhelmed by the scenery before me that no word escaped from my mouth. An enormous hall, that extended so far that I couldn't even catch sight of the other side, was before me. Keep in mind that my stats, compared to before, were much better, which meant my vision drastically improved alongside my stat improvement, and yet I still couldn't see the ending of this place. That was just how enormous this place was. Moreover, that wasn't what left me flabbergasted. It was the fact that in the hall there were warp gates everywhere. A warp gate was a teleportation device that allowed a person to teleport to a given coordinate. It was similar to a dungeon gate, but unlike dungeon gates, where the location was fixed, a warp gate coordinates could be changed. Walking around, and seeing the towering warp gates that were as tall as a house, I felt like an ant. Besides the gates, there were white-clothed individuals with masks that covered their whole faces. Their masks reminded me of the Black Panther back in my previous world. But compared to his black mask, theirs was white. After walking for 10 minutes, I was finally able to see my designated gate. Gate 756. Oh hey, Edward. Standing in front of the gate, a blond middle-aged man who had a cigarette in his mouth waved towards the person escorting me. His long hair, which was tied in a ponytail, and his short untrimmed beard made him look like an unemployed adult who was in the middle of his midlife crisis. Yes. Giving a simple nod to the middle-aged man, the man who escorted me here, Edward, turned around and prepared to leave. As quiet as usual, huh? Seeing Edward leave with no response, the middle-aged man gave up and looked at me. So you're the one who wants to enter the dungeon? Yes. Sigh, just when I thought I had the day off. PCHHHH. Throwing the cigarette on the ground, the middle-aged man stepped on it. All right, follow me. Walking with his hands in his pockets, the middle-aged man grumbled as he walked towards the gate. Timothy 1, Timothy 2, I've got a guest here, so open the gate. Ah, fine. Taking out a card from his pocket, the middle-aged man handed it to the two people in white clothes who were blocking the gate. Taking out a small box, one of the white guards swiped the card, and when the box flashed green, he stepped to the side. By Timothy 1, Timorth 2, don't miss me too much while I'm gone. Waving at two white guards, the middle-aged man stepped into the gate and beckoned me to follow. Stepping on the gate, the middle-aged man took a cigarette from his pocket and lit it up. Looking at me, who was confused, the middle-aged man spoke with a grin. Don't worry, they're always like this. They're just shy. Ah, sure. I'm pretty sure they were not shy. They just didn't want to talk to you. I retorted in my head without showing it on my face. Soon, as the warp gate lit up, I felt my body slowly lift up from the ground. Then I saw my body turn into particles, and shortly after I started losing all my senses. It first started with my vision, then my hearing, and slowly all my remaining senses. Vam. The Author's POV. Chapter 25, Dungeon 1. Blarg. As soon as I regained my senses, I felt my stomach churning, and before I knew it I was on the ground barfing. Fortunately, I didn't puke on my mask as I slightly tilted it upwards to allow the barf to escape from my mouth. First timer, huh? Looking at me, who was on the ground barfing, an amused smile appeared on the middle-aged man's face. It was only after 5 minutes had passed that I was able to pick myself up. Even then, I felt like crap. After having vomited so much, I could barely stand up. Sit down for a bit. Puff. Leaning against a nearby rock, the middle-aged man held a new cigarette between his fingers and puffed. Ha, HAAA. Heeding his words, I sat on a rock. Taking advantage of the small break, I turned my head and looked around. An expansive green field with oak trees everywhere appeared before my vision. On the backdrop of the scene were towering mountains that penetrated the clouds in the sky. The air felt extremely fresh, and it reminded me of the time when I was in Clayton Ridge. Looking around, I could see a massive warp gate behind me. 5 white-clothed individuals patrolled around it. How did they manage to hide such a huge thing? I wondered. You're probably wondering how we can hide the gate from the government's sight. Taken aback, I looked at the middle-aged man. How does he know? Blankly staring at the sky where the clouds were slowly darkening, indicating that it was going to rain soon, the middle-aged man casually said. There's a barrier that covers a 5 kilometers radius of everything here. The barrier prevents the energy coming out from the dungeon from being leaked, and it also blocks electromagnetic waves, preventing any radio communications or detection devices from finding this place. Listening to him, I silently nodded. This was a smart choice. If the government were to find about this dungeon, they would swiftly take it over. No matter how strong the black market was, they wouldn't be able to fight against both the government and the Union. Since dungeons, monsters, and demons fell under the Union's jurisdiction, if an unclaimed gate was discovered, the Union would do anything within its power to claim it. And since the black market was not as strong as the Union, they could only resort to hiding dungeons that they found. But I was curious. Couldn't the Union just send spies and find the location of the dungeon? Cuckoo, your expression is so easy to read, kid. The middle-aged man chucked. It's not so easy for spies to find the location of the dungeons. Tapping on the butt of the cigarette, he continued. In the first place, the reason why we use warp gates is so that they can't find where the dungeon is. Moreover, with the barrier, which prevents any communication to the external world, it's almost impossible for them to find this place. I see. What he said made sense, but a barrier alone was not enough to prevent the Union from discovering this place. Actually, before that, was my expression that easy to read? It was fine if only Grandmaster Keiki could read my thoughts, but now another person, whom I just met, could easily read what I wanted to say. Was my face that easy to read? Moreover, I was currently wearing a mask. Apart from my eyes, everything else was covered. Does that mean he could read my expression solely based on my eyes? I need to make a mental note to myself to start practicing my poker face. Looking at my surroundings, I thought for a bit before saying out loud. If it were me, I would just look at the surrounding geology and narrow it down to possible locations. With the technology of this world, it wouldn't be too hard to narrow places down according to the details of the surroundings. Hoo-hoo, you're a smart one, eh? Laughing at my comment, the middle-aged man stood up. That's true. But, since we are strong, both the Union and the government won't really spend that much effort in finding the dungeons we secured. Suddenly the middle-aged man's eyes narrowed, as he spat the next words coldly. That is unless they want to start a war with US. Standing up, I followed the middle-aged man. By the way, sir, how should I call you? As we were walking, I couldn't help ask him for his name. Although he may look completely unrefined and crude, when he spat those last words, my heart shivered for a split second. Me. Puffing the cigarette in his mouth, the middle-aged man smirked. Just call me Thomas. Okay, Mr. Thomas. Do it without the honorifics, please. It makes it sound cheesy. Ah, okay. After walking alongside Thomas, and chatting with him for a bit, I suddenly felt tremendous energy coming from the distance. You feel it? Yeah. That's the accumulated energy of all the monsters inside of the dungeon. Staring ahead at the source of where the energy was coming from, I couldn't help but feel slightly nervous. Looking at me, Thomas grinned as he said. Nervous? I'd be lying if I said no. Don't worry too much, although it is indeed scary for a first-timer like you, you'll get used to it eventually. Slightly pausing, he looked at the gate which was becoming clearer by the minute, and lightly said. Moreover, wait till you see an S-ranked gate. An S-ranked gate, huh? If the energy coming out from an F-rank gate was this much, I wonder how much energy would come out from an S-rank gate. Just the thought sent shivers down my spine. Yo, Timothy 8, Timothy 9. Greeting two individuals clad in white masks and armor, Thomas handed them a card. Ignoring Thomas, the two guards took the card and scanned it. After making sure everything was all right, both guards stepped to the side and made way for him and me. Taking a step forward, I could feel the tremendous energy bursting out from the gate. I guess this is where we part ways, kid. Momentarily startled by Thomas's voice, as I was too engrossed on the enormous gate before me, I could see Thomas standing beside the guards. Thank you for everything, Thomas. Haha, don't worry about it. Just doing my job. Take care of yourself, kid. Nodding my head, I turned around and faced the dungeon. Ooh. Taking a deep breath, I took my first step into a dungeon. As soon as I felt my eyes regain their usual clarity, I felt a blast of hot air engulf my body. The dry environment instantly caused my lips to tight up, prompting me to repeatedly lick them to keep them moist. The ground beneath me was full of cracks, and signs of skirmishes could be seen everywhere in the surroundings, evidently showing that battles had occurred in this place. At the very end of my sight, I could see sand dunes made up of red and black sand cover the landscape. Just like its description, there really is no source of water nor food here. It was a completely desolate place. The surrounding vegetation was all withered, and there were no signs of animal or living creatures on sight. Aside from monsters, who don't need to eat or drink, the only other living beings were the small insects that hid beneath the cracked earth. Staring at the light red skies that enveloped the surrounding area, I felt like it created a stronger sense of dread in this desolate world. Taking a moment so that I could adjust to the harsh environment, I sat down and quickly checked on my equipment. Carefully placing my hand on my hips where my newly acquired sword rested, I made a recount of the things that I brought. Let's see, the sword is here, food is inside my newly acquired bracelet and should last me for about a week. There also shouldn't be any problems regarding potions, as some cheap, stamina recovery, are carefully stored in my bracelet. What else? I think that's it. Seeing that I didn't have anything missing, I stood up and decided to venture deeper into the dungeon. Alright, to my very first dungeon. Kuka. Stopping in front of a dead tree, I paused and stared at my opponent. Just like any novel with dungeons in them, my very first opponent was a goblin. Yes, a globin. Do you even need me to describe its features? I mean, it was a fucking goblin. Quack. And it sounded like a goblin too. Tapping on the handle of my newly acquired sword, a white streak appeared before the goblin. Click. Kowak. Before the goblin could even have enough time to react, a red dot appeared on top of its forehead, which resulted in the goblin lifelessly slumping on the ground. How sharp! I thought as I admired my new sword. It felt exactly how someone would feel when cutting a block of butter. Smooth with little to no resistance. Pooh. Arriving before the goblin, I quickly spat on its body. Soon after spitting on its body, I kicked its body to the side, while also making sure I cursed at it. Fucking goblin. In short, I was totally abusing the dead goblin. But there was a good reason for my unreasonable actions. I didn't have any grudges against goblins or anything like that per se, it was just that I had to do so that I could trigger a certain event. And... Quack. 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 Yup. A horde of about 20 or more goblins was madly running with blood-red eyes towards my direction. Although dungeons have been with human society for 10+ years, not a lot was known about the monsters residing in them. For example, out of all the monsters known to mankind, the number of monsters for which we knew detailed information could be counted with one hand. Because monsters were not used to the Earth's atmosphere, bringing live samples back to Earth was an extremely difficult and arduous task that simply wasn't worth the cost. Because of how hard it was to get access to live samples of monsters, it became very hard for researchers to find out more about dungeon monsters. The research was extremely crucial in aiding humanity in getting a better understanding of the monsters which resided in the demon world. Researchers have predicted that one day there might be the possibility of the demon world suddenly attacking Earth. If we didn't put a lot of effort into finding more about the monsters that resided in the demon world, it might be too late when the time that monsters can enter Earth arrives. Professor Theodore Romhaus, the one who questioned me last time, was a leading figure in the research of monsters and beasts. Not only was he a fanatic in analyzing a beast's behavior and weakness, but he also loved to analyze and dissect monsters so that he could find out more about them. Monsters were weird creatures. They not only behaved irrationally, but sometimes when certain conditions were met they could trigger an unexpected event. Such as what was currently happening right now with the goblins. Because of my action of spitting and abusing the goblin, I managed to trigger a goblin horde. Actually, this was a little joke I put in the novel, but on several occasions, similar unexpected actions could cause certain monsters to do something you would least expect. In the case of goblins, because they always tended to be the first monsters the protagonists faced when entering a dungeon, I decided to add this feature so that I could bring justice to them. In actuality, I added it because I needed to meet a certain word count, and I couldn't come up with anything. That aside, goblins were basically the most useless monsters out there. For those who wanted to become stronger, goblins were considered training dummies, and for villains and demons, they were considered cannon fodder. They truly were the most abused species in all novels. In the story, Kevin alongside another party entered the Academy's dungeon. At first, the other group wanted to make things difficult for Kevin's party, but because he was too strong they could only silently endure. They later took out their grievances on a nearby goblin, which triggered their hidden feature where all goblins within a 100-meter radius turned berserk and attacked anything on sight. Since goblins were so weak and easily died when entering the Earth's atmosphere, it was very hard to get proper information on them. And on the off chance that they managed to retrieve a live sample, this unique ability of theirs would have never been discovered, as who would just spit kick and abuse a goblin for research purposes. Moreover, even if some deranged scientist did the following, if there were no other goblins around, their special feature was essentially useless. Right now though, I couldn't help but pat my back for adding such a feature. Quack. 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 With this method not only did I not need to find the goblins who were spread across the terrain, but I could also save a lot of time and train efficiently. Tapping the handle of my sword, I prepared myself for a long and challenging battle. The author's POV. Chapter 26, Dungeon 2. Huff, huff, huff. Kneeling on one leg, whilst supporting myself with my sword, which was stabbed on the ground, I gasped for breath. Click. Queak. Before I could even have enough time to catch my breath, a goblin tried to sneak up from behind me, but fortunately, I was still alert and dealt with it in one swift movement. And here I was telling myself to keep my arrogance in check. Holding the left side of my stomach, I felt my whole body become dizzy. I overexerted myself. Looking at my surroundings, the area around me was littered with corpses. My previously clean clothes were now drenched in green blood. For the past hour, I had been fighting against more than 20 goblins. At first, I thought that dealing with 20 goblins wouldn't really pose a problem with my current abilities, but I had severely overestimated my capabilities and underestimated the goblins' abilities. Just because goblins were supposed to be weak, didn't mean they were actually weak. Yes, sure, maybe in a one-on-one they were easy, but not when more than 20 of them were coming at me at the same time. It also had to be noted that my rank was still G+. I was inside of an F-rank dungeon, meaning that every monster I was fighting had higher stats than me. If it weren't for the fact that I practiced the keiki style, I would have never been able to make it this far. Although stats were important, they weren't everything. It had to be said, stats were only a mild representation of one's ability. If someone with high stats were to fight a highly skilled warrior that had lower stats, but far better battle awareness, then the highly skilled warrior could still win. It was like in games when fighting a boss. The boss always had better stats than the main character, but she could nevertheless still beat the boss. As long as you adopt the right strategy, you could win regardless of your stats. Well, given that the disparity in stats was not that different. If the stats of the boss was a lot higher than your game character, then you might as well kiss your game goodbye. On the off chance that the boss was stronger, but the difference in stats between boss and character wasn't that big, then you could do several things to beat it. Like for example, if you hit a monster on their weak spot. By hitting their weak spot, the monsters will sustain far more damage as compared to a regular strike. In goblins' cases, their weak spot was located right on their forehead, just in between their brows. Because my sword's art was extremely fast, I was able to swiftly deal with the goblins with one quick stab. It may sound easy, but it really wasn't. I had to fully concentrate each time, as a slight miss could cause me to lose my rhythm. Moreover, because there were so many of them coming at me at the same time, I had to kite them for 1 hour before I could finally kill them all. It was only after that I dealt with all the goblins, that I felt pathetic for telling myself how I shouldn't become arrogant and always humble myself in the face of danger. Had there been 1 or 2 more goblins, I really might have died. MHHH. Maybe not died, but I would have at least gotten severely injured. Well, if we look at this on a positive note, I was almost halfway towards reaching my goal of collecting 50,000 U. Because the keiki style primarily focused on dealing a singular swift movement at unimaginable speeds, the corpses around me were all in pristine conditions, meaning that I could sell them for more money. Tapping on my bracelet once, I grabbed a goblin and placed it on top of my bracelet. Sham. Right after placing the goblin on top of my bracelet, it disappeared. Great stuff. Like this, for the next 10 minutes, I placed all the goblins that I killed inside of the bracelet. Phew, 21 goblins, huh? If each goblin went for 1,000 U, right now I had accumulated a total of 21,000 U. Well, that was if we exclude the 11% clause, which would be around 2,310 U. Wiping off the sweat that had accumulated on my forehead, I tapped my bracelet twice and a water bottle suddenly appeared in front of me. Dimensional storages sure are handy, huh? By tapping the bracelet once, I could put anything inside of the bracelet as long as it didn't exceed the storage capacity. By tapping twice I could retrieve whatever I stored inside of the bracelet, as long as I thought of what I wanted. Truly convenient. Taking the water bottle, I took big gulps. All that exercise had made me extremely thirsty. After drinking the water, I took out a stamina recovery potion and drank it. Soon after finishing the stamina recovery potion, I felt a rush of energy enter my body, making my previous fatigued expression turn much better. I used 3 stamina recovery potions during my fight with the goblins, yet even with that, I was completely drained by the end of the fight. Standing up, I decided to stop looking for goblins for a while. Since I didn't think I was ready to face another goblin horde and hunting a single goblin at a time was just a waste of time, I decided to directly look for boss monsters. If goblins and monsters of similar strength were considered weak opponents, boss monsters, which were a lot stronger than regular monsters in dungeons, were considered formidable opponents for those who were of the same rank. Not only did they have much more health, but each of them also had the strength that almost neared the next rank. If you were in a G rank dungeon, a boss monster's strength would be at around G+, almost nearing F rank, making them extremely tough opponents to face. Wait, why deal with a boss monster that were stronger than a horde of goblins? It was simple really. When fighting against the horde of goblins, I had to repeatedly aim for their weak spots while kiting. Moreover, because I was being attacked by all sides, I barely had enough time to breathe. It was like doing HIIT cardio for 1 hour straight. With boss monsters, although they were stronger, I could have more room to breathe. Depending on the boss monster I was going to face, chances were that fighting against them was going to be easier than fighting against a horde of goblins. Boss monsters were all different. Some were slow, some were extremely fast, some were tanky, some were super strong. There were many different types of boss monsters, and depending on which one I was going to face, the difficulty was going to vary. For example, if I were to face a really strong boss that had limited mobility, against my sword's art it wouldn't pose as much of a challenge as I could just overwhelm it with my speed. However, if I were to face a similarly fast boss monster, then things would become troublesome. The difficulty of a boss monster depended on how well I could counter its flaws. Each F-rank dungeon had around 25 bosses, and although I didn't know the exact location of each boss monster, with my knowledge as the author of this novel, I could more or less get a basic idea of where they were. Although each dungeon was different, they followed a specific set of rules which I had set up. Though looking back at it now, I think I may have overcomplicated them a bit. A dungeon followed a law of conservation of energy. Once a dungeon was created, its energy capacity was permanent. Meaning that if the balance within the dungeon were to be increased, the dungeon would break and destabilize. So as long as the dungeon capacity remained greater or equal to the external energies inside of the dungeon, monsters plus humans, then the dungeon will function without a problem. Moreover, the monster's energy was always constant, so the only thing that could cause a dungeon to break was if the external energy increased to the point that the overall energy exceeded the dungeon energy capacity. To make things easier to understand, let's assume a dungeon was a half-filled balloon, where the air inside of it represented the total number of monster energy inside of a dungeon. Once a human entered a dungeon, the amount of air inside of the balloon increased proportionally to the human's strength. The stronger the human was, the more air was filled inside of the balloon. If suddenly too many humans entered the dungeon, or too much air was blown into the balloon, then the balloon will pop, and in the case of dungeons, they would break and desync. That was the first and most basic rule of a dungeon. The second rule was that, once a monster was slain, the dungeon will replenish its energy by spawning another monster with equivalent strength. Since a dungeon was located in the demon world, the monsters which were respawned in the dungeon were just monsters that were found in the nearby region. Respawning was the process in which a monster was replaced by another inside of a dungeon. Dungeons were a source of nourishment for monsters, and once a monster inside of the dungeon was killed, a monster would automatically be drawn by the dungeon to fill its spot. However, a dungeon could only draw a monster that fit the missing energy capacity. If the monster was stronger than the monster killed, then the dungeon would automatically reject its existence and prevent it from entering. A dungeon could only be considered cleared when the dungeon could no longer spawn monsters, as all the ones in the vicinity had died. Yeah, sure, you could technically clear a dungeon by just exceeding its dungeon capacity and causing it to desync, but that would be stupid. Not only will the hunters inside of the dungeon find themselves stuck in the demon world due to the desync, but you would also lose a source of income as the monsters inside of a dungeon went for a lot of money due to their tough bodies. Moreover, dungeons were only dangerous for those that entered. For the most part, they were harmless. Why would anyone want to clear them? Lastly, in the third rule, the number of boss monsters present inside of a dungeon differed depending on the rank of a dungeon. Where the higher the dungeon rank, the lower the number of boss monsters present in the dungeon. Moreover, each boss covered a certain area inside of the dungeon and each split the dungeon evenly. This meant that all I had to do right now was find a boss monster, and from there, using a map, I would be able to locate where the other bosses were. Or at least get a general idea. Walking forwards, I could see the towering sand dunes before me. There should be a boss monster in this area. Staring at the sand dunes, I was almost certain a boss monster was going to be there. Not only was the terrain here different compared to the other areas of the dungeon, but as I looked around I could see goblins and other monsters staying away from this place. Thus I took a brief moment to prepare myself before making my way towards the desert-like terrain. As I walked up the dune I felt a sudden wave of heat wash over my face, prompting me to take out a towel and cover my face with it, leaving a slight opening for my eyes. As I was walking forward, I could feel my feet slowly sinking into the sand, making it harder for me to move forward. Kowak. Moreover, with the occasional monsters popping from beneath the sand, my journey towards the boss became extremely arduous. Click. Swiftly taking out my sword, in one smooth movement, I stabbed towards the monster that was trying to attack me. Clank. Huh. Surprisingly, for the first time today, I couldn't kill a monster with one strike. Screech. Letting out a large screech, presumably due to the pain of being hit, the monster, which resembled a worm, tried to assault me. Lowering my body, I twisted my body and elbowed the worm, sending it flying in the air. Schlup. Diving deep beneath the sand, silence returned to my surroundings. Looking beneath, to my feet, I closed my eyes and felt the ground below me. Ooh. Letting out a long breath, I concentrated on feeling any vibration coming from beneath me. There you are. Shah. Appearing from behind my back, I stabbed my sword behind me, right in between my armpit. Screech. Hearing the loud screech and feeling my sword become heavier, I turned around, and like a skewer, the worm hung from my sword as it penetrated deep into its mouth. Thump. Slashing my sword down, the worm fell on the sand. Staring at the corpse of the creature I just killed, I thought. It seems like its weakness is the mouth. Author note. Sorry, this chap is a bit of an info dump. Wink with a frown. Hopefully, it doesn't ruin the experience for you. I am learning as I continue writing and I will make sure not to do this again. I will probably revise this chapter in the near future and I'll try to make it not as tedious to read. The Author's POV. Chapter 27, Dungeon 3. Using my sword to turn over the body of the monster that I just killed, I speculated that it was some sort of sandworm variant. Everything from the top and bottom resembled a worm, however, its mouth once opened resembled a four-petal flower. But unlike flowers, it was anything but pretty. If one looked closely, once the worm-like monster opened its mouth, chainsaw-like teeth sharply protruding from the edges of its mouth would meet your sight. Its exterior, which was as hard as titanium, had some sort of mucus-like substance excreted from its body. TSHH. Using my finger to pick up some of the mucus, I felt a stinging sensation on my finger, prompting my brows to involuntarily frown. Could this mucus be the reason why they can travel in the sand like a fish swims in the ocean? Examining the mucus up close, I took a look at the area where the worm was, and from there I could instantly understand how the worm was able to move freely in the sand. The mucus that the sandworm-like creature excreted had some sort of acidic property which slowly eroded the sand around it, enabling it to move freely in the sand. Fascinating. Wiping the mucus on my finger with the sand, I placed the corpse into my bracelet. Taking my phone out, I opened the monster encyclopedia and quickly scrolled down the list. After scrolling for a bit, I finally found a monster that matched the description of the monster I killed. Equals 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 equals. Name: Sand Sprout. Rank: FD rank. Description: monster that is typically found in desert regions, and is around the size of an adult arm. If caught off guard, with its razor-sharp teeth the sand sprout can easily tear off the limbs of its prey, rendering them immobile. Has extremely durable skin that is as tough as titanium, and excretes a strong acid measuring at around a pH of 1. Weakness: mouth, the only area that is not protected by its tough outer exterior. Location: Everlasting Sunset, Dunes of Sorrow, Lord's Wrath, equals 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 equals. pH 1. Raising my brow, I looked at my finger, which previously touched the mucus-like substance. Fortunately, apart from my finger being slightly red, there seemed to be no abnormalities. It looks like consuming the seed of limit helped my body become stronger, considering that an acid of pH 1 is nothing to me anymore. Putting my phone back in my pocket, I continued venturing deeper into the dungeon in hopes of finding the boss of this area. During the journey, for every monster that I killed and knew nothing about, I would look through the Monster Encyclopedia app on my phone in hopes of finding more about them. Screech. PHFTTTTT. Without even looking at what attacked me, I stabbed my sword to the right, and once I felt my sword become heavier, I tapped my bracelet. 38. So far, the most dominant monster present in this desert-like place was the sand sprout, and since I have fought about a dozen of them, I could more or less predict their movement now. First, if you paid close attention, right before they attacked, you could feel a slight vibration beneath your feet. With this slight vibration, I could approximately determine when they were going to attack. Moreover, from what I observed, they never attacked the front, which meant that they would only attack my right, left, or back. Knowing this, whenever I feel a slight vibration coming from beneath the sand, I could reduce my scope of concentration and react faster. Secondly, and most importantly, for some odd reason whenever they attacked they would always let out a loud screech. Because of this, judging the precise position of where they are going to attack was easy. However, even though they were extremely fast, even if they did screech before they attacked, due to their tremendous speed not everyone could react in time, falling victim to their ambush. But once you knew their pattern, they were essentially the easiest monster to deal with. Huh, what's that? Squinting my eyes, a couple of kilometers from my location I could see a couple of silhouettes that looked like humans. They seemed to be in some sort of mess, as they were all not moving. Party wipe. It wasn't that uncommon for parties to be wiped inside of a dungeon, as a lot of things can go wrong in one. Should I help? To be honest, I didn't have any obligation to help as everyone was on their own inside of a dungeon, but from the looks of it the party has at least 5 people, so what could cause them to be in this situation? Let's calmly think this through. Could they possibly be trying to arouse a passerby's pity, and then suddenly attack them when they let their guard down in hopes of stealing their loot? Probably not. First off, considering where we were, chances of finding anyone nearby was extremely low, so this sort of scheme wouldn't work here. Even if it was like that, I didn't think they could beat me. Slap. Slapping myself hard on the cheek, I continued staring at the people in the distance. I almost reverted back to my arrogant self. There were 5 people in total. Furthermore, since they were in an F-rank dungeon, they were almost likely either F-rank heroes or villains. Although I was confident in my strength, I shouldn't be confident to the point where I could defeat 5 F-ranks without coming back unscathed. The more I observed, the more I was sure that they weren't trying to rob people, as they genuinely looked like they were in distress. Now the real question was whether I should help them. If I did help them, then it would mean that some of my supplies would be cut short, as I would have to share some of it with them, but that aside, there's one thing that's been bugging me since the beginning. Why haven't they called for help yet? Although from a distance it looked like they were all dead, if one looked closely, they were all breathing. Moreover, some of them were even moving, albeit lightly. I was sure they would have had no problem sending a distress signal and wait for help. But why weren't they? This situation was very odd. Part of me wanted to just leave and ignore them, but my instincts were telling me that if I were to leave right now, I may come to regret it later on. Screw it. Lightly sighing, I jumped down the sand dune I was on and slid my way towards where the party was. Screw it, even if it's a trap, I'll just escape. Although I had my suspicions, it was better to be safe than sorry. More than me wanting to help them, it was more about figuring out what had happened. There was simply no way a party of 5 F ranks could be reduced to this state in an F rank dungeon. Even the boss monster would have a tough time against 5 F ranks. As I edged closer to their location, there were evident signs that a battle had taken place. Typically the sand in the desert was shaped in little waves, however, here the sand was all over the place as craters could be seen everywhere. Judging from the state of the surroundings, a big fight had taken place. However, oddly enough, there were no monster carcasses around the area. Normally when fighting against a monster, you would see signs of blood everywhere or some sort of sign that a fight against a monster had taken place. But as I observed closely, apart from some red blood, presumably coming from the party members, there wasn't anything that suggested that they were fighting against a monster. The more I thought about it, the odder the situation was. Actually, now that I thought about it, why were they still alive? Normally, once you fought against a monster, there were only 2 endings. Either you die or they die. Nothing else. But here, although the party was injured, they were still alive. Did this mean that they weren't fighting monsters but another group? But even then, why leave them alive? Something strange was definitely happening here, and if I wasn't careful enough I could get implicated in this as well. Arriving before the group, I noticed all of them staring in my direction with blank eyes, but even though they seemed to be able to sense me, they didn't seem to be able to speak nor process what was happening. No, rather than the fact that they didn't seem to be able to think, it was more like they were too dehydrated to think. This further added to the numerous questions that had piled up in my mind. How long had they been like this? To be dehydrated to the point of not being able to speak, how many days have passed since they had been attacked? The more I looked at this situation, the more questions emerged in my mind. Arriving before the party, I quickly headed to the individual that was nearest to me. Wearing a massive armor that resembled a rhinoceros, I tried to flip his body, which was facing sideways. Gripping the massive plates of metal on his forearm, I tensed my quads and tried to flip his body over. Feeling the enormous weight of the armor, I silently cursed at the fact that I had chosen to help him first. Not only did it resemble a rhinoceros, but it also weighted like one. Judging from how much I was struggling, I presumed the armor was at least 100 kilograms. Clank. Finally, after struggling for a bit, I managed to flip his body upwards. Kneeling down on one leg, I quickly lifted his helmet off his face to get a better look at him. Dry lips, void, and dilated eyes, the situation is much more dire than I originally thought. Checking his conditions, everything pointed to the fact that he was extremely dehydrated. Not only was his skin extremely dry, but his muscles constantly twitched, showing how serious the situation was. Seeing that I didn't have much time, I quickly tapped my bracelet twice and a water bottle appeared before me. Placing the water bottle in his mouth, I slowly watched as he struggled to open his mouth. Although it seemed like he knew that a water bottle was placed in front of him, because he was too dehydrated, his brain had already started shutting down. Seeing this, I tilted the water bottle and let the water fall into his mouth. Gulp, gulp, gulp. Initially, as the water fell into his mouth, he took slow gulps, but as time passed the light gulps slowly turned into big gulps, and slowly but surely, his eyes which had lost clarity returned to their normal state as he frantically drank the water. Watching him greedily drink the water, I let out a wry smile and turned to the others. Looking at them, they seemed to be in similar conditions to the guy who I had just helped. Because I only had one water bottle, I could only wait for him to finish before helping the others. Fortunately, because the water bottle could store up to 50 liters of water, I didn't have to worry about running out of water. THNNNGG. Shoo. Eat this while I'll help the others. Regaining some of his strength, the guy who I had just helped tried to speak, but I immediately shushed him and gave him some jerky to eat. Although I wanted to know exactly what had happened, he was still in a bad state. Right now the main priority was helping the others. I could find time to talk to him once everyone else was fine. Taking the water bottle from him, I went to the next person and a similar scene repeated before me. The Author's POV. Chapter 28, Dungeon 4. Thank you. Sitting next to each other, the party members which were on the verge of death moments before, were now happily munching on some jerky. I was honestly quite shocked by how fast they recovered. Considering the state they were in when I found them, their recovery speed could be described as godly. I mean, it only took them a little bit over 10 minutes before they were able to sit up straight and comfortably eat and drink the food that I gave them. Then I realized, I was no longer back on Earth. Though I have reincarnated in this place for about 3 weeks, I was still not accustomed to this world's common sense, and rightfully so. I mean, how can I adjust to this world's common sense after only having been here for 3 weeks? It's not like I can rewire my brain to accept the fact that people could heal immediately when back in my previous world, in which I lived for 32 years, serious cases of dehydration would leave a person hospitalized for weeks. I was now genuinely curious whether all the people who got reincarnated felt the same way I did. Well, leaving that aside, it seems like I was running low on supplies. In terms of water, I still had quite a lot as my water bottle could hold up to 50 liters of water, but I was running quite low in terms of food. I had only bought a couple of kilograms of food supplies, thinking that it would last me about a week, and rightfully so, as who would have been able to predict such a situation. Moreover, since I was planning on staying here for at most 3 days, I didn't feel the need to bring more than a week's worth of food. What makes matters worse is the fact that the monsters present in this dungeon couldn't be eaten. Generally, monsters could be eaten, but that depended on which monsters. Some of the monsters which were found in some dungeons could be eaten, and when eaten could boost up a person's stats. However, that was only for a small minority of monsters, as most of them are inedible due to their meat being poisonous. And unfortunately for me, all the monsters in this dungeon were inedible. Guess I have no choice. Taking out a small black box from my bracelet, I slid the cover up and a small red bottom presented itself before me. Right above the button, there was a small screen that showed fluctuating wavelengths, indicating the signal strength. This black box, also known as the safe box, was a device that is given to every member before they entered a dungeon. By pressing the button, the black box would send a distress signal to the nearest dungeon guardian. Once the dungeon guardian received the distress signal, they would report it to the dungeon operators, which would then swiftly send a rescue team to come to their aid. The consequence of pressing the button was of course a loss in the deposit, but seeing how mentally exhausted the party was, I could only sacrifice my deposit. When I was saving them, I did look for their safe boxes, but they were either damaged or malfunctioning. Probably from the fight they just had. In the end, I was left with no choice but to use mine. At most I could just ask them to refund me since I was not using it for myself. Taking one last look at the members who although physically looked okay but were anything but fine mentally, I decisively pressed the button. Click. Ding. 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 As soon as I pressed the button, the black box started emitting rhythmic sounds that spread across the surroundings. Strange. Initially, after pressing the button, everything seemed normal as the black box kept constantly beeping. But it was only after seeing the weird looks the party was giving me that I noticed something strange. Frowning, I took a look at the black box in my hand, and to my surprise the small screen that showed the wavelengths was flat. Taken aback, I tapped on the back of the black box multiple times, as I wondered whether it was malfunctioning. It's no use. Shaking his head, the first member whom I saved, the one who wore the bulky rhino-like armor, spoke up. It was also like this for us. Turning my attention towards them, I couldn't help but frown. Then why didn't you tell me beforehand? So in the end, the real reason why their safe boxes didn't work wasn't because they were damaged. Smiling bitterly, the bulky member couldn't help but scratch the back of his head as he said, we still had a bit of hope that maybe the batch of safe boxes we received were malfunctioning and that maybe yours would work, but it seems like this is not the case. Looking at the other members, who seemed to have lost all hope, my frown deepened. I see, there's this one thing that has been bothering me for a while, but what exactly happened to you guys? As I was asking them about what had happened, which was my goal since rescuing them, I noticed them flinch in horror as soon as I posed the question. Soon after, their body went rigid, and their eyes became hollow. Startled, I stood up and looked around me. Hey! Hey! After making sure there wasn't anyone around, I went in front of them and tried to wave my hand in front of their faces, but it was to no avail. Their complexion turned deathly pale as their teeth soon started chattering. Soon, as if they were in a trance, they each simultaneously looked at the sky and started speaking nonsense. Please, no. I don't want dash. No. No. Death, demon. Lucy, I will be late for wait for, Papa. Lord, Savior. Although they were all speaking nonsense, one word specifically caught my attention. Demon. Turning my attention towards the person that said those words, a brunette young girl with 2 pigtails and clothing that were proof of her mage status, started spasming on the ground. Soon after she started spasming, all the other party members showed a similar reaction as bubbles started coming out of their mouths. Oi, what's going on here? Startled, I immediately moved towards them and tried slapping their faces a couple of times to get a reaction from them, but it proved ineffective, as their pupils quickly disappeared alongside their pulse. Dead, 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 fuck. Swearing out loud, I dropped on the sand and dazedly stared at the red horizon. It wasn't their death that shocked me the most, but it was how they died and the last words that the girl said before dying. Demon. There was only one type of curse that could cause someone to die just moments after they recovered. Mindbreaker. An especially vicious curse planted by demons. It now became apparent that this was the work of a demon, as they were the only species that were capable of implanting this type of curse inside of a human. Moreover, I believe that the only reason they were still alive was not because the demon let them go, no, it was because the demon wanted to torture them by making them suffer from dehydration and starvation. Sick fucker. Oh. Pa. Punching the sand with all my force, fine granules of sand started falling from the area I had punched, leaving behind a small crater. Although it may perhaps be due to the shock of me witnessing people dying in front of me for the first time in my life, my emotions were in a state of disarray. I could hardly think clearly, as the images of the party dying kept repeating in my mind over and over again. The little details that I had missed prior to their death started replaying in my mind, such as the expressions they had before they died, and the last words they were struggling to say prior to their death. And here I was hating protagonists in novels who sympathized with deaths. Bitterly laughing, I thought back to the time that I used to leave hate comments on novels where the protagonist sympathized with the deaths of unrelated people. It was only after experiencing this for the first time that I realized how bang on the authors were when depicting the raw emotions one felt when death occurred before them. It was only now that I started realizing how cruel and fragile life was. Since reincarnation in this world, I had mentally prepared myself for these kinds of situations, but it is only after having experienced this firsthand that I realized how daunting it is to see someone die before you. After collecting myself, I took their identifications and everything I could find on their bodies before burying their bodies underneath the sand. Ooh. Taking a deep breath as I calmed myself down, I realized that my decision in helping them was a good one. The main goal in helping them wasn't because I was a good two-shoes. No, I frankly didn't care about them. The only reason why I was upset was because I saw people dying in front of me for the very first time, something that I had never been exposed to back in my past life. Either way, the reason I helped them was because I wanted to know what had happened to them, and fortunately, I had accomplished my goal. Demon. A demon was lurking inside of this dungeon. Taking one last look at the burial site, I turned around and left the area. Knowing that there was a demon here, I decided to go back to the entrance. There was no way I was going to stay here any longer. Clank. Screech. Ha. A loud screech followed by a loud shout resounded across the surroundings as the silhouette of a small human could be seen fighting against a gigantic creature that looked to be the size of a small building. The loud shout and screech were soon drowned by the sound of metal clashing against a hard surface as the small figure slashed towards the enormous creature. Huff, huff, huff. Wiping the sweat that had accumulated on my forehead, I stared at the enormous worm that was before me. Its features, which looked like an enlarged version of a sand sprout, became even more apparent as its figure emerged from the sand. The enormous razor-sharp teeth, which layered on the top of its four petal-shaped mouths, bore down on me as its massive body dove towards my direction each time it attacked. It's been precisely 20 minutes since encountering this creature, and because of its sneaky attacking method where it would continuously dive in the sand as soon as it attacked, and added with its enormous body, I was left totally helpless against it. Previously, when I fought against sand sprouts, I would always target their mouth, which was their weak point. However, because the boss monster was an enlarged version of the sand sprout, even though I wanted to attack its mouth, the option was no longer feasible as my sword was like a small toothpick compared to the sheer size of the monster. Phoo. Letting out a long breath, my right hand, which was gripping on my sword that was sheathed in its scabbard, suddenly clenched, and as I unsheathed it, a beautiful arc appeared in the air as I suddenly jumped backward. Shriek. Without even bothering to hide its presence, the large worm arrogantly appeared from beneath me. Its large mouths, which were riddled with sharp razor-like teeth, opened widely as its enormous frame slowly appeared from beneath the sand. Clank. Crank. Initially, the only sound that could be heard was the sound of my sword clashing against the hard surface of the worm, causing me to lightly frown in annoyance, but my annoyance soon turned into delight as a small cracking noise could be heard from the hard surface of the worm as fine miniature threads that spread like cobwebs started appearing on the tough surface of the worm. Finally, my hard work has paid off. Delighted, I started attacking more fiercely. 10 minutes prior to now, I realized that if I were to continue to pointlessly attack the worm, I would only find myself becoming food for the monster, as I would eventually run out of stamina. Therefore, seeing that my current method was not working, I started devising a strategy. Due to the sheer size of the monster, attacking its mouth was no longer an option. But, just as much of an advantage its size was, it also had a critical flaw. Its speed. It was incomparable to actual sand sprouts who shot like bullets from beneath the sand. Not only were they faster, but they were also much harder to detect, as their small size allowed them to reduce the number of vibrations they could create when moving underneath the sand. Taking advantage of its reduced speed, I started attacking the same place continuously, in the hope of finally cracking its seemingly impenetrable exterior. Finally, after 10 minutes of continuously attacking the same spot, a small crack appeared on the surface of the worm, causing me to rejoice. Now it's time for the roles to reverse. The author's POV. Chapter 29, Dungeon 5. Having already cracked the outer shell of the worm, the rest of the fight was fairly easy. Since I still had a couple of stamina recovery potions, I did not have to worry about running low on stamina as I fought against the boss monster. Thus, I vigorously hacked away at the weakened surface of the monster whenever it appeared from beneath the sand. 10 minutes after the first crack, the cracks that were only as small as thin spider threads started enlarging, revealing the worm's soft inner layer. 20 minutes after the cracks expanded, the tough outer shell finally couldn't withstand the attacks and broke, fully revealing the pulsating inner layer of the worm. Finally, 30 minutes after the outer shell was broken, I rested on top of the carcass of the now dead worm. Slowly catching my breath and looking at my clothes, which were now riddled with holes, I bitterly smiled as I lamented at the fact that I had brought no spares. My sword, which was firmly imbued on the body of the worm, was covered in green blood, and if it weren't for the fact that I was too exhausted to move, I would have already removed the sword as the blood was highly acidic. Fortunately, being an artifact, the sword could withstand the acid, giving me enough time to recover before finally retrieving it. Shwa. Removing the sword from the corpse, green blood sprayed everywhere and some of it even got on my clothes, further ruining them. At this point, I couldn't even be bothered caring about my ruined clothes as I was facing a bigger issue. How do I store this? Alternatively, looking at the massive corpse in my bracelet, my brows knit. If I was fortunate enough, then maybe I could store the corpse, but, looking at the contents of my bracelet, I couldn't help but curse inwardly as half of my storage space was already filled with corpses. It simply did not have enough space to fit this monster. What bugged me off even more was the fact that this sort of issue could have easily been resolved if the safe box still worked. Although I wouldn't need to pay a deposit, a small commission would have been needed to pay if I were to have called for help in regards to collecting the monster corpse. But now that the signal was gone, I swear I will kill this goddamn demon. There was no doubt that the corpse of this boss monster could have fetched me a hefty sum, but now that I didn't have enough space and I couldn't call for support, I was only left with two options. 1. Dump some of the monsters inside of my bracelet to make space for this monster, or 2. Only take the most important parts of the monster and discard the body. Typically, the skinning and material collection would be left to the dungeon management, as untrained hands could result in the monster's corpse becoming damaged and thus reducing the overall monetary compensation given. At the end of the raid, the corpse would directly be given to the dungeon management, which would process it in front of you. During the corpse dismantling, in the off change that a monster core was found, the dungeon management would immediately propose an offer to you. Typically, not all monsters had monster cores, as only a small percentage of monsters had them, but on the rare occasion that a monster core was found, you had basically hit the jackpot, as each monster core went for a really high price. Looking back and forth between my bracelet and the gigantic body before me, I contemplated for a bit before sighing and making my way towards the monster. Shah. Using my sword, I directly hacked the worm's massive body, resulting in more blood splattering all over me. At this point, I doubt I'll be able to return with clothes on. As I hacked the monster's massive body, I slowly collected its teeth, organs, and other useful parts that could be traded for money. I decided to just discard the monster and collect the most important parts of the worm. Though, I do feel pity for the fact that I didn't have enough space. Since the worm's outer shell could have easily have fetched me a good sum of money due to its durability. In any case, if I were to place this monster inside of my bracelet, I would no longer have any more space in my bracelet. Though the monster was huge, it would at most be worth, in monetary terms, about the same as 10 regular monsters, which took less space, so I might as well just take the important parts. Pity that I lost some money, but hey, like they all say, you can't have it all. After 30 minutes of constant hacking, I managed to collect all the important bits. I did look for the core, but sadly the monster didn't have one. As I didn't have my hopes up, I wasn't disappointed. Who knows, maybe one of the many monsters in my bracelet had a core, though I doubted this. Satisfied with what I had, I turned around and made my way back towards the entrance of the dungeon. I had already wasted too much time fighting against the boss monster. But I had no choice, it's not like I could outrun it. Thus, I was left with no choice but to fight it. During the journey back, I started noticing strange things happening in my surroundings. Stopping, my feet slowly sank in the sand. Using my hand in a similar fashion to a military salute, I squinted my eyes to get a better view of what was happening ahead. Sandstorm. Before me was a massive wall-like front that was approximately 5,000 feet in height. The wall-like front expanded all the way towards where my sight couldn't see and was quickly picking up its speed. Whiz. The whistling sound of the glaring wind could be heard as the sand in my surroundings started to get swept by the massive wall-like front, entering the turbulent and suffocating cloud of sand. Looking at the massive storm cloud that was quickly approaching me, I was left with no choice but to make two decisions: run away or keep going forward. Don't really have a choice, do I? Bitterly smiling, I discarded the possibility of me running away as the sandstorm was approaching at speeds that I couldn't keep up with. Moreover, the entrance of the dungeon was in the same direction as where the sandstorm was. Left with no other choice but to continue walking forwards, I tightly tied my makeshift hijab and headed towards the sandstorm. Soon the storm enveloped me, rendering everything in front of me impossible to see. Inside the sandstorm, the further I walked the more I could feel the wind picking up its speed as granules of fine sand started hitting my eyes, obstructing my vision. It started to get so bad that I couldn't keep my eyes open due to the constant stinging sensation in my eyes. I wished I had a pair of glasses. I thought as I kept walking forwards with my eyes closed. Honestly, I did not prepare enough. Because I was in too much of a haste, I did not properly plan out my trip inside the dungeon, resulting in me making too many newbie mistakes that shouldn't have happened. Things such as forgetting to bring a spare set of clothes or bringing extra food rations in the rare chance I was stranded, were things that every person who went to the dungeon did. I think that the fact that this was my first time entering a dungeon and the fact that I was still not accustomed to this world's common sense contributed to me making so many mistakes. There was just too much of a difference between writing a novel and actually being in one. In the novel, I could just make Kevin have everything with just a thought. Things such as a spare set of clothes and extra food were never a concern for him, as I would always make it so that he was always prepared. Moreover, whenever the protagonist would prepare to enter a dungeon, I would just simply write, packed up his stuff, which was not specific enough. That in itself was one of the reasons for my negligence, as I tended to depend on the novel too much. Things that should have been common sense like clothes and at least a month's worth of food completely flew over my head, resulting in me facing the current situation. It was fine to use the novel as a reference, but I shouldn't rely on it too much. I needed to start thinking things thoroughly before going into dangerous situations. Whiz. The further I walked into the storm, the stronger the wind became. My makeshift hijab was swept away by the strong gales, exposing my face to the sand, which was traveling at extreme speeds, causing my face to become numb due to the pain. Using my hands to protect my face, I slowly but steadily walked further into the storm. My current goal was to reach the eye of the storm, as it was the safest place to be inside of the storm. The reason why the eye was so calm was that the strong surface winds that converge towards the center never reach it due to a force called the Coriolis force. Whiz. 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 2 hours into the storm, although everything looked the same, my ears picked up the extreme sound of winds ruthlessly glaring in a certain location. Hearing the ruthless sound of the wind, I knew that I was at the edge of the eye, where the scariest, nastiest, gnarliest part of the storm was located. The eye wall. The area around the eye formed an unbroken wall that obstructed anything that tried to pass it. Fortunately, I was prepared for this. Foo. Arriving at the edge of the eye, I let out a long breath and calmed my mind. Slowly a white glow emanated from my body as I touched the handle of my sword. Soon the glaring sound of the wind disappeared, my mind became as calm as a lake, and everything around me turned tranquil, making me fall in some sort of a trance. The first movement of the Keiki style, quick flash. Shwa. At the speed that the naked eye couldn't see, a small gap appeared on the surface of the eye. Without skipping a beat, I immediately jumped inside the small gap. Whiz. 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 Huff, huff. Lying face down on top of warm sand, I breathed heavily as I felt the area around me calm down. I was finally able to catch a breather. Though I was in the eye of the storm, the strong sound of the wind never disappeared. Dusting the sand that covered me, I took a good look at my surroundings. The first thing that I noticed was a large circular wind wall that was dyed yellow due to the sand. It expanded all the way around me, inside of a circular region that had a radius of a couple of kilometers. Looking up, I could see the cloudless blue sky that I had not seen since entering the storm. This is crazy. This was a sight I would have never been able to see back in my previous world. Ever since reincarnating in this world, I have experienced something new each day. Sitting on the sand, I let out an exhausted yawn. Apart from the glaring sound coming from the eye wall, everything around was peaceful, allowing me to finally catch my breath. Just as I was about to take a quick nap, in the distance, at the center of the eye, I noticed a large black castle-like structure. What's this? I had never heard of such a thing appearing inside of the novel. What was going on? Slowly walking towards the black infrastructure, I warily glanced at my surroundings, but it was to no avail as everything around me was quiet. Arriving in front of the large black castle, I warily placed my hand in front of its large wooden door that was at least 5 meters in height. Creak. Slowly the door opened. Instantly, a thick scent of iron invaded my nostrils. Opening the door further, and revealing what was behind it, I froze in shock. Thick black pillars that reached all the way to the ceilings appeared all over the massive hall, supporting the building. On the pillars, brightly lit torches were attached, illuminating the surroundings, revealing a scene that never in my life would I ever had wanted to see. A pool of blood covered the entire floor of the castle as limbs and corpses could be seen sprawled all over the floor. The corpses each had their eyes wide open, and their expression was that of pure terror. A shudder ran down my spine as this gruesome scene slowly imprinted itself inside of my mind. Slowly I lifted my head and then I saw it. Haughtily sitting on top of a dark throne made of skulls, a dark-skinned humanoid creature with devilish horns protruding from the top of its forehead appeared in my sight, causing my blood to turn cold. With one of its legs resting on the armchair of the throne and an arm supporting one of its cheeks, the creature had its eyes closed. It had a muscular human body with two bat-like wings attached to its back. From behind its tailbone, a long black tail wiggled around the air. Sensing something, the humanoid creature slowly opened its eyes, revealing two deep red eyes that exuded boundless bloodlust. Staring at me who was frozen solid in place, the humanoid-like creature eerily smiled as it looked down on me. Coo, what have we got here? The Author's POV. Chapter 30, Dungeon 6. It felt as if time had frozen. My mind blanked. My blood froze. My breathing quickened. My pupils dilated. I thought I was prepared. Since reincarnation inside of my novel, I knew that one day I would encounter a demon. I was ready, I thought. But looking at the creature haughtily sitting on the throne, hallucinations of death repeatedly replayed in my mind. I have to run. I repeated again and again in my mind. I knew that, yet my legs refused to listen to me. Bah, dump. Bah, dump. The hall was silent, and only the sound of my heartbeat repeatedly pulsing could be heard. Sweat started dripping down from my body, soaking all my clothes. With a shivering hand, I tightly clenched on my clothes, right where my heart was. What's this? Am I scared? There's no way I can fight against that. Was what my mind repeatedly told itself as my eyes transfixed themselves onto the demonic creature that was amusingly looking down on me from the throne. With its blood-red eyes, the demon looked down at me as it smiled widely. It seems like a little mouse has sneaked inside my abode. Licking its lips, the demon eyes carefully looked at me up and down, almost as if a delicious snack had presented itself before it. Crack. 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 Using its thumb, the demon slowly cracked every one of its fingers on its right hand. Ooh. Letting out a long breath, I forcefully tried to calm myself down. This is all an illusion. What I was experiencing was the innate fear a prey faced when meeting a predator. If I thought about it rationally, although my opponent was strong, it wasn't to the point that I would have to despair. Yes. The demon's stats couldn't be above F rank, else the dungeon would have already desynced. The fear I was experiencing was all in my mind. I didn't have to fear what was before me. Was what I repeatedly tried to tell myself, yet I still couldn't stop my body from trembling. The feeling I was experiencing was similar to the moments before I took my final exams. I knew I could do it, as I had prepared rigorously for it, but even if I was prepared, it didn't stop me from being scared. How cute. Amusingly looking down on me, the demon leaned forward as its red eyes carefully looked at me. Instantly, it felt as if all my secrets had been laid bare for the demon to look at. It felt as if nothing could be hidden from its two prying blood-red eyes. G rank. Tap. 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 Shaking its head disappointedly, the demon began tapping on the armrest of the throne as it started pondering. Finally, after a couple of seconds, the demon shook its head in disappointment. Too bad, too bad. Seemingly having come up with a decision, the demon's demeanor completely changed from its leisurely self from before. Instantly, thick bloodlust exuded from its body, suffocating me. Let me introduce myself. Thwop. Standing up, the demon's large bat-like wings expanded from its back, casting a large shadow over me. Taking one step forward, smiling from ear to ear, the demon elegantly bowed. I am Baron of Everblood. Inside of a large, spacious, luxurious corridor, a middle-aged man leisurely walked. His hair, which was tied in a ponytail, accompanied by his unkempt beard and sunglasses, made him look out of place. Walking along the corridor, the people that were next to him stepped to the side to let him walk. Despite his looks, he was treated as if he was a VIP. Ding. Suddenly, the middle-aged man felt a small vibration from his pocket followed by a light ring. Ding! 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 Just as he was about to ignore it thinking that it was nothing important, his pocket started vibrating again, repeatedly. Finally, noticing that something wasn't right, the middle-aged man took out a small black box from his pocket. Looking at the contents on the black box, the middle-aged man's brows knit together in a frown. This may be more troublesome than I thought. Sighing, the middle-aged man disappeared from where he was standing and reappeared in front of a gate with the number 756 imprinted on the side. Stop right there. As soon as he appeared, two white-clad individuals obstructed his path. Timothy 1, Timothy 2, I don't have time for this today. Yes, the middle-aged man was in fact Thomas. Taking out the small box from his pocket, Thomas showed it to the guards. Seeing the box, the two guards immediately moved to the side and allowed Thomas to enter the portal. Seeing the two guards move, Thomas disappeared once again and reappeared inside of the portal. Let's just hope it's nothing serious. Those were the last words the two guards heard before Thomas disappeared from their sight. Be Baron of Everblood. As soon as the demon introduced itself, like when you replaced a rusty gear, everything started to click into place. Baron of Everblood, an elder of the Vanity tribe, sub-branch of the demon clan of Pride, and a Baron-ranked demon. An existence that only appears right before the third cataclysm in the later half of the novel. Why was he here? A Baron-ranked demon was not something a G rank like me could face. The demons were ranked from King, Prince/Princess, Duke, Marquis, Earl, Viscount, and lastly Baron. A demon prince and demon princess had a power level equivalent to around SSS, in terms of human power level. Following Prince/Princess ranked demons, were Duke ranked demons whose power level was around SS, the same as the strongest humans alive. After Duke ranked demons were Marquis ranked demons at a power level of around S followed by Earl ranked demons at A, Viscount at B, and Baron at C. Those were the approximate power levels of the demons. Currently, humanity could only fend off at most against Duke ranked demons. If a Prince/Princess ranked demon showed up, humanity would stand no chance as each rank increase was a substantial increase in power. Fortunately, the dwarves, elves, and orcs were keeping the Prince/Princess ranked demons in check. If not for them, humanity would have long gone extinct. Knowing the power levels of the demons, it came as a great shock to know that I was currently in front of a Baron-ranked demon. Keep in mind that a Baron-ranked demon was 4 ranks higher than me. No wonder I felt so much pressure. I thought as everything started to make sense. But wait. If it's a Baron-ranked demon, why didn't the dungeon desync? Frowning, a sudden thought occurred to me, causing my pupils to dilate as I silently muttered. Dungeon overload. Stopping, the demon looked at me in surprise. How did you know that? Looking up, I could see the demon looking at me in both shock and surprise. As expected. The demon was actually trying to cause a dungeon overload. A dungeon overload was similar to a dungeon desync in that it involved a dungeon becoming oversaturated with energy. However, contrary to when dungeons desync, where the dungeon just loses connection to the human world. In a dungeon overload, all the monsters inside of the dungeon get transported into the human world. Imagine tens of thousands of monsters suddenly appearing out of nowhere. The consequences alone would be disastrous. Fortunately, this was not a problem for now. There was a reason why humanity had still not gone extinct. It was simply because the time wasn't ripe yet. Because of how unstable Earth was, the Demon King was still unable to ascend into the world. Further added with the fact that the Demon King was currently being held back by various forces, the looming threat coming from the Demon King was still small. The Demon King, one of the ultimate overlords of the universe, grew stronger the more planets it ate. Through its numerous exploits in which it conquered and ate planets, the Demon King grew into being one of the strongest creatures in the whole universe. It had gotten to the point that almost every race in the universe was forced to join hands in order to stop the Demon King. At the moment, the Demon King was only one planet away from becoming the strongest being in the universe. Once it consumed one more planet, no being would be able to stop the Demon King. The world would be at the Demon King's mercy. Knowing this, many forces have joined together in a last-ditch attempt to stop him from conquering its next target. Planet Earth. Apart from the Demon King's ascension, there was another factor that prevented the demons from fully engaging against humanity. That was, apart from demons, the demon army was still unable to adapt to the human atmosphere. Because of the low mana density in the atmosphere, due to Earth only have been exposed to mana recently, monsters couldn't survive on Earth. This was why dungeon overloads weren't considered a threat. However, before the third cataclysm, when the Earth's mana density reached a certain point, the event that marked the beginning of the third cataclysm happened. Suddenly, as the people on Earth were going about their own day, dungeon overloads started occurring in almost every dungeon around the globe. But differently from normal dungeon overloads where the monsters inside of it would die immediately upon entering the human world, the monsters that came out from the dungeons were able to adapt to Earth's atmosphere and survive. Soon the Earth was overturned into an apocalyptic world where law and order ceased to exist and only your own survival was what mattered. Who you thought were your friends suddenly backstabbed you just to ensure their own survival. That was the beginning of the third cataclysm. Thwop. Flapping its enormous bat-like wings, the demon instantly appeared before me. Because I was lost in thought, by the time I noticed the demon moving it was already too late. Placing its sharp finger on my neck, the demon's blood-red eyes looked at me intensely. I asked you a question. Gulp. Swallowing a mouthful of saliva, I stared at those two blood-red eyes. Click. Soon a white glow emanated from my body, followed by a clicking sound. Thud. Suddenly a black finger flew in the air before landing on the cold pavement of the castle. As soon as the finger flew in the air, I immediately retreated a couple of steps as the demon took a couple of seconds to realize what had happened. KHH. What? Bewildered, the demon looked at its hand that was missing a finger. Soon after, the finger that was on the floor disintegrated into nothing and a new one appeared on the demon. As expected. This wasn't the demon's real body. Had this been a real Baron-ranked demon, I would have already been dead by now. The fact that I could cut off its finger, albeit because I caught the demon off guard, was a clear sign that this was not its main body. Had it been its real body, instead of a finger landing on the cold hard floor, it would have been my head. You actually dared to hurt this Baron? Absent-mindedly looking at his now replaced finger, the demon directed an immense pressure on me. GH. Feeling the massive pressure, my knees bent a little. You actually dared to injure me. Walking slowly towards my direction, the pressure that was exerted over me kept increasing by the second. Slowly, my knees bent more and more. I couldn't move. I was stuck. I could only helplessly watch as the demon slowly walked in my direction. With every step it took, I felt death getting closer and closer to me. Sweat started dripping from the side of my face, as my body further bent downwards. Arriving before me, the demon slowly lifted my chin up with its sharp finger. For what you've done, I will make sure that you pay dearly. Ah! Tracing his finger along my cheek, a large gash opened up as blood slowly dripped down on the cold floor. Arriving in front of a large gate, Thomas spotted a group of people surrounding an individual donning a black butler outfit. He had neatly combed hair, wore black-framed glasses, and had a serious disposition. Edward, brief me on the situation. Briefly glancing at Thomas, Edward took out a tablet and started briefing everyone on the situation. Reporting, 10 individuals have gone past time limit. We tried contacting them through the safe box but there was no response. Noticing that something was strange, we tried contacting other individuals whose time limit was still not due, and we also got no response from them. Pausing slightly, Edward flipped through the reports on the tablet and showed them to everyone. We sent 2 F-ranked dungeon guardians to check what was going on, but they too went missing. Currently we are prepared to send in Group Alpha 79354 into the dungeon. Frowning, Thomas looked at the gate. Noticing that nothing was out of the ordinary, he decided to check its energy level. Let me check the gate. Placing his hand on the gate, Thomas suddenly felt a strange fluctuation. Then, boom. The gate slowly turned black and demonic energy spread across the surrounding, causing the greenery within a 10-meter radius of the gate to wither. Taking off his sunglasses, Thomas's expression darkened. Shit. The author's POV. Chapter 31, Dungeon 7. Quickly change this to code black. Hurriedly shouting orders, Thomas disappeared from where he was standing. Ah, goddammit. This is more serious than I had expected. Quickly teleporting back into the black market, Thomas quickly pressed the emergency button, causing the whole facility to turn red as alarms started ringing. Dying. 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 Taking out his phone, he quickly dialed a number. Ring. 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 Hello. From the other side of the phone, a cold, emotionless voice entered Thomas's ears. "Boss, we have a situation." "Explain." "Dungeon Gate 756, Code Black, possible dungeon desync." Pausing slightly, the cold voice said, "I understand, you will be granted full authority regarding this matter." Tack. Right after saying that, the person on the other side of the phone hung up, leaving Thomas standing there speechlessly. Goddamn. Why do I always have to do the dirty work? Cursing out loud and stomping his feet in anger, Thomas quickly dialed another number. Ring. 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 Yes. Shortly after dialing the number, a male voice entered Thomas's ears. Hearing the voice, Thomas quickly shouted orders. "Call in all Alpha units with a rank F or below." "Sorry." "Do it now." "It's an order." "Why yes." Suddenly being ordered by Thomas, the person on the other side of the phone was left momentarily confused, but as soon as he noticed the urgency in Thomas's voice, he immediately did as he was instructed. Tack. Hanging up the phone, Thomas looked around. The whole facility was in a state of lockdown, and the whole place was dyed red as alarms constantly rang through the surroundings. Pinching the middle of his brows, Thomas sighed. "I seriously hope the situation is not as dire as I think it is." Ah! Deep gashes started appearing all over my body as the demon traced his finger around my body. It felt as if I was being cut by a cold metal knife. I wanted to move, but I couldn't. It felt as if a massive boulder was weighing down on me, preventing me from moving. Although the Baron of Everblood was not using his main body, the presence exerted by him wasn't something I could handle. Baron of Everblood had killed countless experts throughout his whole life. He rose from being a regular demon to against all odds becoming a Baron-ranked demon. Countless sacrifices were made in his journey to the top. He had shed lots of blood throughout his journey to the top. He had also backstabbed demons whom he had once called friends just to be able to reach the point that he was now. Just now, all that the Baron of Everblood needed to do was release the killing intent that he had acquired through countless killings, to completely paralyze me. Knowing this, I needed to buy myself time to adapt to the killing intent. It's just that it was much easier being said than done. It felt like a looming threat that was similar to a long sword that hung in my heart, ready to pierce it and kill me at a moment's notice, causing my body to paralyze in fear. Very soon, as I felt death coming closer to me, an idea came into my mind as I started speaking. "Aren't you curious as to why I know what you're doing?" Halting, Baron of Everblood stopped tracing his finger on my body and looked at me. "Speak." "Hoo, the only reason you haven't killed me yet is because you want to know how I knew you were trying to create a dungeon overload, right?" KHK. Tracing his sharp black finger on my neck, a red line appeared. Blood slowly dripped down from the cut, falling onto the cold ground. "Get to the point." "KH, not only do I know that you're trying to create a dungeon overload, but I also know that this isn't the only dungeon you're planning to overload." Alto, I knew that spilling what I knew was stupid. I had no choice. It was either this or death. I had to buy time. At least enough to figure out how to get out of this situation. Moreover, me revealing what I knew to Baron of Everblood wasn't actually that significant of a matter. Hierarchy mattered to the demons. With the fact that he was Baron-ranked demon, I knew that he didn't actually hold that much authority. Even if I escaped from this ordeal, chances were that even if he reported what I told him to the higher-ranked demons, unless he brought proof, his findings would most likely get dismissed. Thus it didn't matter if I spilled what I knew. There was a high chance that the case would not go anywhere. Moreover, what mattered to me the most was my life. As long as I bought time, I could definitely figure something out. Exclamation point. Thud. Suddenly, as soon as I finished speaking, the pressure that enveloped me magnified. My legs, which couldn't withstand the pressure, finally gave out, and I knelt on the cold hard ground. Gripping me from the neck, Baron of Everblood lifted my body up. My face was only a few centimeters away from his face. We were so close that I could feel his breath on my face. The demon's breath was like hot steam. It slowly burned the skin on my face, turning it red. Facing Baron of Everblood's hot breath, my face winced in pain. Turning my head to the side, I tried my best to avoid his mouth. It hurt. "Speak." Gripping on my neck even harder, Baron of Everblood fiercely stared at me. "I know that you're planning in advance for when the mana in the atmosphere becomes dense enough for the monsters to be able to withstand humans' atmosphere, coup." Feeling the grip on my neck become tighter, I took advantage of the small gap that was created by the Baron of Everblood as he was distracted by my statement to free myself from his grip. Staring at his now empty hand, Baron of Everblood stared in my direction. His already blood-red eyes turned a shade darker as he spat out his next words in pure fury. Oh. It seems like someone has not suffered enough. Huff, huff. Holding onto my neck, I heavily gulped for air and glared at Baron of Everblood. Click. Ha. A thick black arm flew into the air as Baron of Everblood stood there rooted in his spot, stupefied. He couldn't react in time. Slowly standing up, I sheathed my sword back into my scabbard. Damn this. Just that move alone used most of my mana. I needed to think of something quick. Dungeon Seekers, Mission Control Room. Inside of a large enclosed room, 20 large tables, all with several computer displays, were filled with people tirelessly working together as they exchanged data. A large screen was at the front of the room, displaying rows upon rows of data for the entire team inside of the room. On the side, on the walls, there was a multitude of clocks, displaying everything from the current time to the time every entrant has been inside of a dungeon. This was so that they could monitor if someone stayed inside of the dungeon more than the designated time. On one of the large tables, with his hands leaning on the table, an individual who had a headset and microphone on his head looked to his right as he reported. Reporting Alpha units have entered Dungeon 756, Red Desolation. Thomas, who had his arms crossed, looked at the monitor in front of him where multiple camera views could be seen. Ask for a status report. Roger. Inside of a desolate world where a deep red sky enveloped the environment. Only the sound of the wind rustling through twisted, shrubby trees could be heard. Suddenly, the silence was disrupted as white-clad individuals materialized in the desolate world. Voom. 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 Alpha teams, do a status report. Alpha Unit 70154, check. Alpha Unit 62584, check. Alpha Unit 75894, check. Alpha Unit 48334, check. All teams confirmed. Alpha Mission Operation Captain, turn on your camera and report what you are seeing. Click. Turning on the camera that rested above his pec, a white-clad individual with a golden ring on his arm spoke, camera activated, taking measurements, trying to gain contact with dungeon guardians who had entered previously. KHHHHH. Hearing a continuous static sound coming from his receiver, the captain shook his head. Unresponsive. Okay, order all Alpha teams to proceed forward. Alpha teams, move. Marching forward in an organized pattern, all the white-clad individuals followed the captain deep into the dungeon. Schwa. PFFFFF. A white line materialized in front of the Baron of Everblood and black blood slowly fell on the floor. Gripping my sword tightly, I applied more pressure on the handle of my sword that stabbed his body. In the heart. You think this can actually hurt me? Grabbing the sword that stabbed his body, Baron of Everblood cruelly smiled as he slowly pulled the sword out from his body. TCH. You immortal bastard. Seeing his nonchalant behavior as if a sword stabbing his body was nothing, my heart sank. Pam. Before I even had enough time to retrieve my sword back, I felt a massive force on my stomach forcing me to bend over in pain. Barf. The force was so strong that my taste buds were engulfed in a bitter and sour taste as green liquid splurted from my mouth. Ka. Clank. To think you actually thought you had a chance against me. Throwing my sword to the side, I could hear the sound of metal hitting the ground. Each time I heard the sound of my sword clattering on the ground, parts of my heart shattered along with it. Without the sword I was nothing. My only chance at fighting back was gone. Looking at the Baron of Everblood, who was slowly approaching me with a wide grin plastered on his face, seemingly relishing my expression of despair, finally fear overtook me. Let me teach you what happens when you piss off a demon. What's this? Alp KHHHST S-Rep T. Not bothered in the slightest by the fact that the radio signal was getting disrupted, all of the Alpha Team's members stood rooted where they were as their eyes transfixed themselves on the horizon. In their view, a massive wall of sand slowly approached them. It felt as if an avalanche was approaching them in a form of formless mass. Soon it enveloped them. Inside the storm, extremely high winds lifted the sand particles into the air, unleashing a turbulent, suffocating cloud that reduced the visibility of everyone inside of it to almost nothing in a matter of seconds. KHHHHHHH. Apart from the raging sound of the wind, only the static sound of the radio could be heard. Ah! Staring at my arm, which was bent at a weird angle, I screamed in pain. It felt as if a wave of electricity has coursed through my body. Excruciating. Now, we are only just beginning, don't disappear on me already. Grinning evilly, Baron of Everblood licked his lips as he looked down on my body which was sprawled on the ground. Staring at his expression that seemed to take enormous pleasure at my suffering, I hatefully glared in his direction. Previously, when I was attacking him, I wasn't just blindly attacking him. I knew since the beginning that his body was immortal. That was because his body was actually fake. It was merely a part of his real body that could endlessly regenerate. Had he not done that, then he would have never been able to enter an F-rank dungeon. When I was attacking him, I was looking for his weakness, the core. Everything in the world had a weakness. Even the strongest being in the world had a weakness, the Demon King wasn't an exception. This was just the law of the world. Unless you were a god, no perfect being existed. Because this wasn't Baron of Everblood's main body, his main weakness was a core that was used to operate his body. I knew exactly what his weakness was, yet I faced a new problem, I didn't know where it was. I tried stabbing his body in multiple places, but it was to no avail as it always regenerated within seconds. And now that my sword was out of my reach, I lost all hope in defeating Baron of Everblood. What shall we break next? Suddenly, as I was in the midst of despair, like a shining ray of hope, I saw a small cut on the demon's arm. Previously when I had cut the demon's arm off, I watched him regrow it in an instant, but looking at it now it seems like it had not fully healed as a small scar remained. Crack. Ah! Before I could rejoice, I felt the bones in my leg getting crushed causing me to scream in pain. Relishing my pained expression, Baron of Everblood laughed loudly. Ha 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 ha, scream more. Crack. Ah! Alone in an empty castle, a demon laughed, whilst a human screamed in pain as the demon broke his legs. But unbeknown to the demon, with each scream the human slowly approaching a shiny metal sword that laid on the floor. Alpha Team respond, Alpha Team. KHHHHHHH. Staring at the screen that had turned black, Thomas quickly picked up the radio and tried to communicate with the Alpha Team members, but it was to no avail as all he heard was the static sound of the radio. Bam. Shit. Slamming his fist on the table, Thomas's hands rested on the table as he frantically thought of solutions. Time was tight, he needed to quickly think of solutions. The more time passed, the bigger the likelihood of the Alpha Team being in danger increased. If he could have, he would have already dived into the dungeon himself, but because he was too strong he couldn't, lest he wanted to risk killing everyone that was within the dungeon. Pacing around the room as he frantically called different numbers, Thomas suddenly heard an excited shout next to him. Sir, we're getting a signal. Quickly arriving next to the individual who had shouted, Thomas quickly took the radio from his hands and spoke. Alpha Team, do you copy? Alpha Team, do you copy? Alpha Team responding, we found a survivor preparing first aid. Inside of a dark enclosed space, a demon sat cross-legged as a frown appeared on his face. MH. Is this it? Through the vision of his clone, Baron of Everblood stared at the lifeless corpse on the floor. He shook his head in disappointment. It seemed like his new toy no longer worked. Shing. Huh. Just as he was about to end it, Baron of Everblood suddenly lost control of his clone's body as it slowly started disintegrating on the ground. Looking to his right, his clone's arm, he could see a sword stabbing straight into it, exactly where the core was located. Blankly staring at the now disappearing arm, Baron of Everblood looked up and saw the bloodthirsty expression of the young human who he was about to kill. Wait for me. Voix. Those were the last words he heard before he felt his connection with the puppet disappear. As black ambers filled the air, the demon's body disappeared from my view. Clank. Dropping the sword in my hand, I felt all my remaining energy drain from my body. Soon my body started twitching on the ground, and blood started dropping in the ground. Ah, is this how I die? What's this? Touching my cheeks I could feel drops of water falling down from the corner of my eyes. Slowly tears started staining my face. Was I crying? Why was I crying? I had already died once, why was I crying over such an insignificant matter? I am such a pussy. How could a grown man like me cry? Pathetic. Looking around, I could only lay on the floor pathetically as the floor became dyed in red. Slowly as the pool of blood around me expanded, vague recollections of my past life started resurfacing. At first, my life was great, I had a warm family that loved me so much. I was happy then. Too bad you only realize how much you cherished something until you no longer had it. Since then my life had never been the same. I worked hard. I truly did. But all I got in return was a pathetic life where I would lifelessly be typing at my keyboard away. Every day was a struggle. My weight, my health, my job, my mental health, I was suffering so much. Then, I was suddenly transported into my own novel. A new beginning. A new start. I thought that maybe, just maybe I could use this chance to redo my life. I did everything I could so that I could at least be happy. Was asking for a bit of happiness too much? I don't want to die. My vision slowly became darker and darker. My body slowly turned cold, and I could feel my breath become thinner by the second. Slowly as my vision started to disappear I could faintly hear the sound of rushed footsteps coming my way. Was my mind playing tricks on me? Well, it didn't matter as my brain slowly lost its ability to think. We found, survivor, prep, aid. Those were the last words I heard before I was enveloped in darkness. The author's POV. Chapter 32, Skills, 1. Report everything that happened since we lost connection to you guys. Neatly standing in a line, white-clad individuals stood with their backs straight and with their hands behind their back. In front of them, Thomas stood there looking at them solemnly. Stepping up, a white-clad individual with a golden ring on his arm spoke. Reporting to Vice Director, during the sandstorm some sort of radio frequency disruptor was installed preventing us from communicating with the outside world. We also couldn't communicate with each other, and because of the low visibility I ordered them to stay within 1 meter radius of the closest person next to them. Nodding his head, Thomas took out a pack of cigarettes and lit one of them. Placing the cigarette in his mouth, he exhaled a cloud of smoke as he listened to the report. Puff. As demonic energy was detected before entering the gate, using the energy detector we managed to locate the source of the demonic energy. Pausing slightly, the captain looked around at his team members and said, "The eye of the storm." The eye. Are you sure? Affirmative. Frowning, Thomas pinched the middle of his brows and contemplated. If the source of the demonic energy was within the sandstorm, then it can be confirmed that this was an artificially created sandstorm, but why create a sandstorm? Suddenly, as he was contemplating, a thought struck him, causing him to quickly focus his attention back on the Alpha Team captain. Did you enter the ice storm? Shaking his head, the captain spoke, negative, by the time we arrived at the edge of the storm everything had already started dying down. Huh. Surprised by this information, Thomas's frown deepened. When everything died down, we managed to catch a glimpse of a black castle not far from where we stood. Interrupting once again, Thomas thought of something as he asked. A black castle. Describe me its features. Here, sir. Taking out a tablet, the captain handed it over to Thomas who scrolled through the photos. Soon his face revealed a trace of astonishment. This is the work of a baron or higher-ranked demon. Pardon. Confused, the captain tilted his head. How could a baron-ranked demon or higher be able to enter an F-ranked dungeon? Here, take a look at this. Pointing at the castle in the picture, Thomas pinched his fingers and zoomed in. Soon the features of the castle became clearer, revealing what seemed to be a small beacon. This. Nodding his head, Thomas's face darkened, and gravely said, "Yes, it's a mana compressor." A mana compressor was a device used by the demons to compress all the mana inside of a dungeon. In doing so, they could create a small bomb with a power equivalent to 5 atomic bombs. The force released by the bomb was so strong that it would cause the pocket dimension to crumble, resulting in monsters suddenly appearing in the human world. A dungeon overload. Fortunately, monsters couldn't adapt to Earth's thin atmosphere. Else the consequences would have been disastrous. Moreover, a mana compressor could only be utilized by baron-ranked demons or above. That was because only baron-ranked demons or above could withstand the power of the mana compressor without going insane. Once a demon reached a noble rank, not only did they become stronger, but their mental fortitude increased by many folds. A mana compressor concentrated all the mana that was directed to it into a ball of thick dense energy. But in order for it to do so, it needed someone to direct mana into it. This required an absurd amount of mental strength as one needed to direct all the mana in the atmosphere into a specific point. That's where a demon came in. The demon would send a clone of their body in the dungeon, and through the connection they had with their clone they would direct the mana towards the mana compressor, which would slowly condense all the mana that was directed to it. Only baron-ranked demons or above could do so. I can't believe they were scheming such a thing from underneath our noses. Staring at the tablet for a bit, Thomas looked at the captain and asked. Fortunately, it seems like the mana compressor has stopped working. Did you find anything else? Nodding his head, the captain responded. Affirmative. We have found a survivor. Ah yes, how could I forget that? He vaguely remembered hearing something about a survivor, but at the time he was too focused on making sure everyone was alright that it slipped through his mind. Scrolling down the tablet in his hands, his finger directly paused on a photo. Though when he had previously met him a mask covered his face, Thomas was instantly able to identify the person in the picture. It's him. Slowly opening my eyes, I blankly stared at the unfamiliar ceiling for a moment, then slowly I turned my head to the side. As my head cleared, a strong pungent smell of alcohol invaded my nostrils. The room was silent and apart from my heavy breathing, only the beeping sound coming from the electrocardiogram in the corner of the room could be heard. A throbbing pain hit my head as I looked at my body, which was covered in bandages. Aside from the bandages, long metal wires that connected to the electrocardiogram were attached to my body. I tried to get up. But once I tried to move my upper body, it was instantly engulfed in pain, refusing to listen to me. Slowly, my body sank onto the large white mattress. Laughing bitterly, I could only lay there pathetically, hoping for the pain to disappear. Staring at the ceiling, illuminated with white fluorescent light, a myriad of questions emerged in my head. How long have I been here? Where am I? What happened? Shutting my eyes, I tried to remember what had transpired prior to waking up in this unfamiliar environment. Clank. But before I could reminisce, the door of the room opened, and a doctor wearing a blue short-sleeved scrub top with a white coat and similar blue-colored pants entered the room. Behind the doctor, a rough blonde individual sat on a chair with his legs crossed and a newspaper in his hand. Mr. Thomas. Russell. Noticing something, Thomas, who had previously accompanied me to the gate, put away the newspaper in his hands and entered the room. He looked the same as when I first met him, but differently from last time. He was currently wearing a brown suit which was full of wrinkles. How are you feeling? All right, I guess. That's a relief. Sitting down next to my bed, Thomas loosened his necktie and took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket. Do you mind? Shaking my head, I turned my head around and looked outside the window. It was currently nighttime in Ashton City, and the city lights brightly lit the area around the hospital. Puff, just what I needed. Puffing a cloud of smoke, Thomas leisurely leaned back and also looked at the brightly lit night. You did good, kid. Because of you, we managed to stop a possible dungeon desync, which would have resulted in a serious loss for us. Pausing slightly, Thomas deeply looked at the star-filled night, so after a brief discussion with the higher-ups a decision was made. Once again pausing, Thomas turned his attention towards me and couldn't help but let out a dry laugh as he spoke. Well, they decided to grant you a skill. A skill. Opening my eyes wide, I immediately shook my hands and refused. I haven't nearly done enough to receive a skill. Although outwardly I looked humble and surprised, inwardly, I was rolling my eyes. I just almost died. This was the least you could do. Still, although my bewildered reaction was mostly acting, I was still slightly surprised. If in this world if someone were to ask you what the most sought-after thing was, most wouldn't even think twice before answering skill. Even though monster parts, martial manuals, weapon manuals, cores were all things that held tremendous value, in the eyes of people their worth was far lower than skills. Unlike martial arts, weapon arts, or anything that required some sort of mastery, skills could be learned instantly. Typically a person would spend years learning a technique before they could proudly say that they had mastered it. However, with skills all you needed to do was learn it and all the information would instantly be transferred in your brain. There was no need to train the skill, as once you learned it you were capable of instantly using it. It was a total cheat. In a matter of seconds, you could do things that would generally require someone years of training to master. I mean, who wouldn't want them? Skills could be found inside of dungeons, and just like cores, you could get them from monsters. However, the drop rate compared to cores, which was already quite low, was even slimmer, resulting in skills being extremely rare. And thus once the first skill was discovered, similarly to cores, a huge uproar ensued as everyone started coveting them. I mean, who wouldn't want to become stronger without putting that much effort? From that point on, whenever a skill was found, huge auctions would be established. A single skill could go up for at least a couple million U in the auctions. Ha ha ha, is helping us not lose a dungeon that earns us millions of U each day not something worth a skill? Plus we aren't really going to give you a high-ranking skill, just an F-ranked one. I guess you do have a point, but an F-ranked skill is still a skill. Just don't fuss over such trivial thing. How can an F-ranked skill be considered a trivial thing? I thought to myself, as I once again realized how rich and powerful the black market was. To call an F-rank skill a trivial thing just goes to show how powerful of an organization they were. Although F-rank skills were on the lower end of the spectrum, they were still worth a huge amount of money. Seeing how they didn't think much about an F-rank skill, I couldn't help but wonder how many skills they had with them. Could they possibly be in possession of S-rank skills? If so, then I had really underestimated how influential the black market was. Even as the author of the novel, I didn't know much regarding the black market as I never dwelled too deep on them in the story. They were merely a convenient organization that the protagonist used to facilitate his growth. I just knew the general layout of the organization, the identity of some of the higher-ups of the organization, but other than some other trivial information, the black market was shrouded in a veil of mystery. But it seems like they were a far bigger organization than I had made them out to be, especially if they were in possession of multiple S-rank skills, which were far harder to find. There were only 18 S-rank dungeons known to mankind, which was a dramatic difference compared to F-rank dungeons which numbered over tens of thousands. As the supply was lower, the number of skills that could be acquired was also lower. Moreover, S-rank dungeons were far harder than lower-ranked ones, making S-rank skills that much harder to acquire. One S-rank skill could pretty much allow someone to buy a small city. That's how expensive they were. But it has to be said that, although S-rank skills were indeed much stronger than lower-rank skills, that didn't mean that low-ranking skills were useless. In fact, lower-ranked skills, depending on the person, could turn out to be far more useful than an S-ranked skill. Take an assassin for example. If they were given the option to choose between D-rank skill, Shadow Cloak, a skill that enables the user to hide under a shadow, or S-rank skill, Tyrant's Wrath, which was a mass AoE skill, they would obviously prefer the D-rank skill which was better suited for their profession. At the end of the day, it all came down to how compatible you were with the skill. Alright, you better rest now. Standing up, and straightening his wrinkly suit, Thomas flicked the cigarette in his hand and lightly stomped on it with his foot. Once you recover, I'll guide you to where you can collect your skill. Finished with what he wanted to say, Thomas turned around and left the room. The Author's POV. Chapter 33, Skills, 2. Fortunately, thanks to how advanced the technology of this world was, all my broken bones and cuts were healed overnight. What used to take months to heal back in my previous world, healed overnight. Truly miraculous. It was Sunday morning and Thomas came to pick me up. It was finally time for me to collect my reward. A skill. I had originally planned on acquiring a skill when my strength reached a certain level, but it came as a pleasant surprise for me to be able to get my hands on one this early in the novel. It has to be noted that within the academy, apart from the professors, only a small percentage of students had skills. This was including the third years. Only the rich second-generation heirs could even have a chance at acquiring a skill, and even then, they could only gain access to at most a couple. They were just too expensive and rare for guilds to freely give them away. Following Thomas inside of a remote location that was heavily guarded against all directions, arriving in front of a large building that seemed to look like regular storage space, Thomas nodded towards an empty space. Soon a couple of shadows in the form of two white-clad guards materialized in front of us. I was slightly startled by their appearance, but I soon calmed down. The people guarding this place should obviously be strong, else what was the point of even storing such valuable things here? After doing multiple checks on Thomas, the guards that were clad in white hid in the shadows, completely masking their presence. After seeing the guards disappearing, Thomas placed his palm on the wall. Clank. A couple of seconds after placing his palm on the wall, a small section on the wall disappeared, revealing a small compartment that contained a digital 6-digit lock. Beep. 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 Arriving in front of the box, Thomas quickly inserted the passcode. Right after inserting the password, a green light blinked a couple of times, and soon after, in a similar fashion to before, a small circular compartment appeared on the wall. Opening his right eye wide, Thomas leaned on the wall and placed his eyes on the hole. Clank. Vroom. Seconds after placing his eye on the wall, a loud rumbling resonated across the surroundings and the overhead door slid upwards. That's one hell of an annoying process. Stretching his back, Thomas grumbled as he waited for the door to completely slide upwards. As soon as the door opened completely, I felt a blinding light enter my eyes, prompting me to cover my eyes with my arm. After the light died down, a completely unknown world was presented before me. A thick metallic scent instantly entered my nostrils as I passed the large metallic gate. Soon, the scent was replaced by an aromatic scent that pleasantly enveloped my nose. Beyond the door, an open entryway with high ceilings painted with vivid imagery depicting an image of several humans fighting against a demon instantly caught my attention. The marble floor polished to the point that the lights neatly reflected on the marble, reminded of a clear lake that gently reflected the sun rays coming from the sun. Arriving inside of a spacious room with patterned walls, heavy curtains, area rugs, high windows, and upholstered furniture made of heavy oak, Thomas told me to patiently sit down on a red sofa. Feeling my body sink on the sofa, I nervously waited for Thomas. To say I wasn't nervous would be a lie. Although there was no one present in the room, it felt as if a million eyes were staring down at me, watching my every move. Every moment that Thomas was away felt like hours. Fortunately, the wait did not last for long and Thomas soon came back with a red card in his hand. "Follow me." Handing me the card, he urged me to follow him as he walked towards a certain area within the facility. Nodding, I followed along as I admired the hallway that was filled with paintings, designer pieces, and other artistic decor that made this place feel like an establishment for the filthy rich. Soon we arrived in front of a large safe door, in which two individuals patiently stood. However, what instantly caught my attention was the fact that although their uniform was similar to the regular guards in the black market, contrary to their white color, theirs was red, indicating that they had a higher status than the white-clad ones. Made sense since they were the last defensive line that led to the vault. Nodding to the guards, Thomas's footsteps halted. Looking at me solemnly, he said, "All right, before I leave, let me warn you in advance. You are only allowed to choose one skill, let me repeat, one skill." As he spoke, Thomas repeatedly emphasized the fact that I could only take one skill. Looking at me to make sure I understood, he continued. "As you already know, skills are expensive, even for us. Though our organization may be powerful, giving away skills to non-members is still a bit of a burden for us. If not for the fact that you helped us solve a major crisis, we would have never considered giving you a skill." Listening attentively, I repeatedly nodded my head. Everything that he said I already knew. His seriousness was understandable as skills were indeed worth a lot. Pausing slightly, Thomas had a gratified smile on his face as he looked at me who understood what he said. Taking the red card from my hand, he handed it to the guards. "Another thing you need to remember is that the skill you can choose can only be between rank G and F, higher ranked skills will be inaccessible to you. The vault you're about to enter has 3 floors, in which you will only be granted access to the first floor." Lightly chuckling, Thomas teasingly looked at me. "If you manage to repeat what you did again, we might just grant you access to the higher floors." "I'm good." Instantly my mouth twitched as I wholeheartedly refused. No way would I want to go through that experience again. "All right, I'll wait outside. Once you're done with choosing your skill, you can directly learn it under the watch of one of the guards." Finishing what he wanted to say, Thomas stepped to the side and allowed me to enter the vault. "Stand there." Stopping in front of the door of the vault, the red-clad guard pointed towards a certain point. Vroom. Following his order, I stood on the spot that the guard pointed. Soon my whole body was enveloped in red light. Ding. Ding. "All right, you're all set." Beep. Krrrrrrr. Swiping the card on the vault, a green light appeared following which a loud rumbling could be heard as the door of the vault slowly opened. "All right, have fun, kid." Nonchalantly waving his hand, Thomas leaned on the wall and took out a packet of cigarettes only to be glared at by the guards, causing him to bitterly smile. Amusingly shaking my head, I headed towards the vault. Clank. Stepping into the vault, the door behind me closed. Soon silence enveloped my surrounding. Looking up, I could see large, sturdy bookshelves lining the walls, marching across the floor in colorful rows, stretching all the way to the end of the first floor. A staircase leading to a second level could be seen at the end of the room. Wow. The endless amount of skills presented in front of me left me flabbergasted. In the F rank section alone, there were no less than 1,000 books. Skills, like in games, came in the form of a book. That's why this place looked no different from a regular library. Each book had a different color and represented the different affinity of the skill book, ranging from fire, water, earth, and so on. You have 1 hour to select your skill. Just as I was in a daze, snapping me out of it was a cold voice that came from the speaker in the corner of the room. Quickly recollecting myself, I looked through the G and F rank sections. Because there were so many skills to choose from, I immediately decided to narrow down my scope of search. First things first, I immediately choose to exclude skills that required a high mana consumption. Because I was not a mage, my mana capacity was fairly low. Choosing a skill that drained of all the mana in my body would be extremely detrimental for me, as the Keiki style, too, used a bit of mana whenever I execute a skill. If I didn't use mana, there was no way I would have been able to move so fast. Excluding that, my scope diminished dramatically. Secondly, I needed a skill that shared some synergy with the Keiki style. When fighting against Baron of Everblood, I noticed that although the Keiki style was powerful, in the beginning stages it was a fairly subpar sword art. Mainly because once my first move was blocked, I could no longer do anything else, as shown how Baron of Everblood negated me by allowing my sword to penetrate his body. I needed something that could buy me time so that I could readjust my stance, or at least something that complemented my fighting style. Having narrowed it down even further, I decided to look through the F and G sections. Looking through, I couldn't help but drool at some of the skills. I found some especially amazing skills. One especially caught my attention. Fist of Fury, a punching skill that conglomerates all the mana within a certain radius, releasing a devastating punch that can leave devastating damage if someone is caught off guard. Monetarily increases strength by a factor of 2. Reading the description of the first skill I picked up in the F rank section, my mouth dropped in an O shape. Increases strength by a factor of 2. That's terrifying. Especially if someone who was already super strong used the skill. Imagine one of the heads of the Union using this skill. Their punch alone could probably shake a whole mountain. This skill basically became scarier the higher someone's rank was. If this was the standard of F-ranked skills, a shudder ran down my spine thinking about the higher ranked skills. Though I knew some of the S-ranked skills that Kevin would later acquire, it didn't stop my mind from imagining the devastating scene they would cause in real life. Thank God, they were rare. Looking through the bookshelves, I paused every now and then to get a better understanding of some of the skills. This continued for 30 minutes until finally, I managed to narrow down my selection to 3 skills. 2 of the skills were F rank, while 1 was G rank. G, Monarch's Indifference, skill that enables users to erase all emotions, and act as a supreme monarch that only calculates the best option regardless of emotions. F, Flame Sanctuary, skill that summons a ring of fire around the user. Apart from the user, scorching heat will envelop everyone that is within the Flame Sanctuary. F, Winter's Breath, skill that enables the user to exhale a breath full of frost, resulting in the surrounding temperature within a certain radius to drop below freezing temperature. Reduce enemy speed by a factor of 2. These 3 skills were the ones that were the most useful for me right now. Not because they were strong, but because they fit my fighting style perfectly. F, Flame Sanctuary, attracted me because it was a skill that could buy me time. By invoking this skill I could momentarily catch my opponent off guard, and during the time my opponent was surprised I could regain my stance and attack them again. F, Winter's Breath, served a similar purpose to Flame Sanctuary, but contrary to that skill, this one slowed down the opponent. Unlike Flame Sanctuary, that could be used to end a fight by catching them off guard, this skill was more for a prolonged fight. It could help me gain a huge advantage when fighting, as the Keiki style shined when the enemy was slower. In terms of synergy, this one was the one that shared the most synergy compared to the other 2 skills. Lastly, G, Monarch's Indifference, the only G rank skill in the list, and probably the one that tempted me the most. One thing that I reflected on from my fight against Baron of Everblood was that, had I been calmer, I wouldn't have found myself in such a dire situation. As soon as his arm reconstructed itself, I should have noticed the fact that only a part of it healed. I was too caught up by his presence that I did not notice such small detail. Had I done so, the fight would have ended quickly and I wouldn't have had to suffer so much. Moreover, Monarch's Indifference was especially beneficial to me who had yet to kill a human. Yes, I did technically kill Lucas and Patrick, but that was in the VR world where I felt no guilt in killing them. Being someone that came from Earth where you were preached since birth that killing was bad, I still couldn't bring myself to actually kill a human. At least not yet. Killing a human in this day and age was something most students within the academy would have to do at least once, as we would eventually be tasked to kill certain villains. The mental hurdle I needed to push myself to kill a human was much higher than the people that were born in this world who were exposed to such things since birth. With the aid of Monarch's Indifference, I wouldn't need to worry about that anymore. Moreover, with this skill, when fighting against an opponent, emotions like nervousness, fear, and anxiety would never cloud my judgment again, allowing me to perform at my best during critical times, reducing the likelihood of me dying. Having thought it through, I decided to pick Monarch's Indifference. Although it was the only G-rank skill in the list, this skill, for me, was the most useful out of the 3 skills I picked. I just had this feeling that regardless of how powerful I became in the future, this skill would accompany me to the end. The Author's POV. Chapter 34, Skills, 3. Clank. Arriving at the entrance of the vault, a compartment opened up. Place the skill inside of the box. Soon, a cold voice rang in my ears, to which I followed as ordered and placed the book inside the compartment. Looking at the book which was inside of the compartment, I couldn't help but look at it carefully. It had lumpy leather bindings, and its pages were of golden color. The cover of the leather book was empty, with no title nor pictures on it. Although it looked like a book, when I tried opening it, I couldn't. No matter how much force I exerted, the book wouldn't budge. Fascinating. Krrrrrrr. After placing the skill book inside of the compartment, the vault door rumbled, slowly opening up. Waiting for me on the other side of the door was Thomas, accompanied by the 2 red-clad individuals. All good. Walking up to me, Thomas took a quick peek at the vault. Seeing that everything was all right, he urged me to follow him, and we were soon back in the waiting room. Wait here while I'll go and check if everything is all right. Nodding my head, I watched Thomas leave. Ignoring the fact that I was once again alone in the room that felt like millions of eyes were watching, I excitedly thought of my soon-to-be skill. Now that I thought about it, this skill was basically tailor-made for me. As someone who was not exposed to a society where superpowers and no morals existed, a skill like this was what I needed to help me adapt against situations that would require me to do things I wouldn't have otherwise ever thought of doing back in my previous world. Things such as killing or witnessing gore were not something I could get used to immediately. This was partly one of the main reasons I was so overwhelmed by Baron of Everblood's presence before. Had it been Kevin or any of the other protagonists, such a thing wouldn't have impacted them as hard as much it did me. As I was deep in my thoughts, with a complicated expression, Thomas walked back into the room. Soon, with my skill book in his hands, Thomas arrived in front of me and asked, "Are you sure about this?" "Positive." Lightly smiling, I nodded and took the skill book from his hands. "All right, suit yourself." Although it seemed like he wanted to say something, Thomas stopped himself midway and just waved his hand in resignation. Not noticing his reaction as I was too engrossed looking at the skill book, I immediately placed my hand on top of the book and circulated my mana. Soon a white glow enveloped me, and the book magically disappeared. Closing my eyes, a flood of information instantly transmitted itself in my mind. It took me a total of 5 minutes to digest all the information. Opening my eyes, a satisfied smile appeared on my face. Checking my status, I was pleasantly surprised by its changes. Status . Name, Rendover. Rank, F. Strength, F. Agility, F. Stamina, F. Intelligence, F. Mana capacity, G+. Luck, E. Charm, G. Profession. Swordsmanship LVL.1. Martial Manual. Keiki Style. Sword art created by Grandmaster Toshimoto Keiki. A 5-star module that focused primarily on reaching the apex of swordsmanship and speed. Upon mastery, the sword art becomes so fast that before an opponent could even think about their next move, their heads would already be rolling on the ground. Skills. G. Monarch's Indifference. A skill that enables users to erase all emotions, and act as a supreme monarch that only calculates the best option regardless of circumstance. Surprisingly, my rank increased from G+ to F. I did not notice it before because I was busy recovering, but it seems like my stats had shot up a notch. I had not suffered in vain. I think that all the time I spent killing monsters and nearly dying against Baron of Everblood had helped me finally rank up. Satisfied, my smile, which wouldn't leave my face, deepened. Kid, wipe that smile off your face, it's creepy. He. Ignoring Thomas, who was looking at me with a disgusted face, I went through the information that had just entered my mind. I really wanted to use the skill right here and right now, but I knew that it was inappropriate. Moreover, with my current mana capacity, I could only use the skill for approximately 30 minutes. Though it was not long, 30 minutes should be enough, as my stamina was about that much anyways. Also, as long as I improved my mana capacity, the time at which I could utilize the skill would also increase. Alright, let's go. Sighing, Thomas left the room we were in. Soon we were at the entrance of the storage space. Here? Question mark. Stopping, Thomas looked back at me and handed me a small card. Taking the card, I looked at it in confusion. Soon I understood. Yup, this is your last reward. You've been promoted to VIP. Ah, really? Yeah, since you only chose a G rank skill, I felt a bit compelled to give you this. Thanks. Looking at the shining black card with a golden VIP sign engraved on it, I couldn't help but feel my already good mood become even better. The VIP card not only granted me access to the black market without the need to go through the hassle of remembering the password, but it also allowed me to get priority on all dungeons, as well as the fact that I wouldn't need to pay a deposit in the case of emergencies. This alone was enough for me to become happy, yet the VIP card had one other feature that made all the other perks seem like nothing. It allowed me to have access to any dungeon available. Yes. Be it C rank, B rank, A rank, I could enter any dungeon I wanted. Yes, although going to dungeons of D rank and above was almost like asking to be killed, they had their perks. They were a great way to help me train my mentality. Although I wouldn't do any killing inside of a D rank dungeon, just being there could help me adapt myself to the pressure exerted by D rank creatures. This was extremely advantageous, as it would help me not panic once I encountered a stronger enemy. From what I learned when fighting against Baron of Everblood, in a fight, 90% of it was the mentality and 10% was actual skills. If your mentality crumbled even before the fight started, then you were as good as done. However, if even in the face of a stronger foe, you managed to retain your composure, the likelihood of you winning would increase drastically. That's why true experts tended to be colder than other people. No skill nor potions could train your mentality. Only when you were in the face of true danger would you be able to train your mentality. Fortunately, I had acquired a really good skill to help me with regard to mentality, but I couldn't be too reliant on it. If I relied too much on a skill, then when the time that my skill no longer worked came, either because I was out of mana or for some other reason, I would instantly crumble under the pressure. Alright, I've said enough. Taking out a cigarette from his pocket, Thomas put his sunglasses back on and waved goodbye. I've left my number on the back of the card, contact me if you need help with anything. Sure, thanks. After parting ways with Thomas, I quickly collected all my loot that was very nicely dismantled by dungeon seekers, and went to Small Snake. Although no core was found, I managed to make a whooping 100,000 U. 50k U from my loot, and 50k U as a fee to keep everything that had happened a secret. For obvious reasons, if news spread out about the incident, dungeon seekers' reputation would crumble. In this accident, apart from me and a couple of people, a total of 39 people had died. 5 of which were the ones that I had previously met. Although I was a bit sad about the fact that no one would ever know how these people disappeared, I could only sign it, as refusing wasn't really an option. In this world where people would constantly disappear without someone ever knowing how, the death of these 39 people wouldn't have that much of an impact on society. I just felt bad for their family. Imagine never finding out how your loved one disappeared. I could only lament at the fact that this world's morals had completely twisted since the appearance of the demons and superpowers. Dialing Small Snake's number, I quickly made an appointment with him. Though I almost died, this experience was more fruitless than I had expected. With the money I had to acquire, I could double the amount I had originally planned to invest. Now all I had to do was wait a month's time before money would rain into my pockets. After parting ways with Ren, Thomas walked back to Dungeon Seekers. Throughout his journey back, Thomas's thoughts couldn't help wander back to Ren. To say that Thomas wasn't confused would be a lie. Typically, youngsters would always choose the flashiest and strongest skill they could find. Since Thomas had granted Ren access to all skills from F to G rank, he had expected him to choose one of the strongest F rank skills. But contrary to his expectations, he chose a G rank skill that focused on mentality rather than being flashy. This came as a pleasant surprise and made him look at Ren in a better light. Had he chosen a flashy F rank skill, Thomas would have just treated him as one of the many passers-by of his life, but now things were different. This kid seemed to be different from most hot-blooded youths who only thought about being strong without thinking about the process. He seemed rational, which was unusual for someone of his age. Even though there was evidence that showed that Ren had fought against a Baron-ranked demon, Thomas didn't put too much thought into it. Although the demon was Baron-ranked, at the end of the day it was just a clone. It was definitely surprising that Ren had managed to defeat it, but it wasn't something that would make him pay close attention to him. But now, seeing how he did not let greed overtake his rationality, Thomas started thinking that perhaps, just maybe, he had found a hidden gem. I'll have to ask someone to check and send me his files. Being an accomplished rank hero, not many things interested Thomas. He had seen every prodigy that there was out there. Recently there had been rumors of a new prodigy popping up in the loch. He had originally intended to do some research, but now, someone else had caught his interest. After getting someone to transfer all of the information about Ren, Thomas took a quick look at his data. He was quite surprised by what was shown in the information. Talent Assessment D. Rank 1750. At first, he found it ridiculous, but seeing his exam results he could tell the data was not wrong. Was I wrong? Thinking back at what had transpired in the dungeon, although he hadn't seen firsthand how Ren fought, Thomas knew that the exam results were wrong. Having seen a lot of prodigies in his life, Thomas could instantly tell when one was talented. It wasn't so much about their data, it was more about their demeanor. Unbeknownst to Ren, after he had come back from the dungeon, he was a completely different person. The air around him had changed. Remembering back when he had first met Ren, although Thomas couldn't see his face, he could see that he was a bit unique. He had the air of a tourist. The first impression that Thomas got regarding Ren was that he looked like a tourist. He looked at everything like it was something new and exciting. He didn't look like someone who was just about to enter a danger-filled space. It felt as if he was going on a holiday. Thomas didn't point this fact out to Ren in the beginning because he had seen lots of similar people throughout his life. It wasn't his responsibility to warn people about the dangers that were within a dungeon. However, after the incident, Thomas noticed Ren change. If before he looked like a tourist, now he looked like an immigrant. He had something that he previously didn't have. Resolve. It now seemed that whatever he went through inside of the dungeon had caused him to grow and finally realize how dangerous the world was. He had a similar demeanor to top-class heroes. One that looked at the bigger picture. Though he still was not comparable to them, Ren was in the right direction, and Thomas felt that if given time Ren's name would spread across the globe. Well, his prediction could be wrong, but there was no harm in believing in him. Lightly smiling, Thomas slumped down on his comfy chair. Let's observe a bit more. I feel like he will soon give me a pleasant surprise. The Author's POV. Chapter 35, Elective 1. It's been about 2 weeks since I had officially entered the academy, and I couldn't say I was particularly excited about classes. Not only was it hard for me to train, due to the constant stares, but for the theoretical courses, I really couldn't understand a thing. Although they were interesting, because of how advanced all the material was, I didn't even know how to solve the easiest questions. What was the point of them being interesting when you knew nothing about them? I didn't even have the basic foundational knowledge. It was like presenting an integral calculation to a kid who had just learned how to perform additions. It was totally ridiculous. I just realized, at this rate, I might actually not make it past my first year. Although the loch mainly focused on nurturing heroes. In order to pass the first year, you still needed to pass all your courses. If I couldn't pass a course, my chances of graduating, let alone pass the first year, were extremely slim. This was a huge problem. That was because the second year was the main year of the academy arc. It was the year where, after the protagonists who have all settled down and adapted to school life, suddenly came face to face against villains. It was the most impactful part of the academy arc, which helped the protagonist and his friends grow in both strength and character. Missing such an event would be detrimental to my growth, as not only did I lose access to the top-end facilities provided by the academy, but I would also lose my chance to gain experience fighting against villains. Alright guys, that marks the end of the lesson. I hope you enjoy yourselves at the elective fair. Disrupting my thoughts was Donna's enchanting voice. So today is the day, huh? Today was the day the elective fair was held. The elective fair was an academy-wide event where the third and second years tried to recruit new members to their elective. Once an elective was chosen, you couldn't change it until the start of the new year. There was a wide selection of electives available for each student to choose from. There was a specialized combat course, a programming course, a dungeon exploration course, and many more activities to choose from. This was also the time when first years would come to contact with the senior years. Because the first, second, and third years were separated, they didn't have many chances to interact with one another. Electives were a great chance for the seniors to interact with their juniors. Moreover, the more first years they managed to recruit to their elective course, the more budget they were granted by the academy. So every year, the first years found themselves getting assaulted by all types of seniors looking to recruit new members. Furthermore, there was another thing one needed to be careful of when taking into consideration what elective to join. That was, they had to watch out for the hidden politics in certain electives. Factions existed inside of the academy. A good example was the blood supremacist faction that Gilbert used to be a part of back when he was still a student. Many electives were secretly a recruitment process for certain individuals to their factions. Therefore, one should be careful when choosing an elective, as choosing one faction means being an enemy to all other factions. Fortunately for me, I was keeping a low profile. Since I was fairly unnoticeable, I was almost certain that I wouldn't be dragged into this senseless conflict. However, although I may not encounter any problems during the elective fair, that didn't mean others would have it as easy as me. Take Kevin as an example. Because he stood out too much, he would not only have to face the endless number of people requesting for him to join their elective, but he would also have to fend off against factions who were eager to have a talented person like him in their group. I could already imagine how miserable his life would be for the next few days. Actually, I didn't need to imagine, I already knew. Moreover, since I already knew what would happen in the next few days, I also knew that this was the period where one of the main scenarios for the first-year academy arc began. Seniors versus juniors. The first major event that Kevin encounters since joining the lock. An event which, even if I didn't want to participate, will be forced to join. Why did I even? Just imagining myself encountering more arrogant characters was upsetting my stomach. At least I still had Donna with me. Watching her leave, I couldn't help but admire her beauty, which was more mature compared to the main heroines who were still young. As I was busy admiring her, she turned her head around and met my line of sight. I couldn't remember much after that, as I felt my body suddenly become lethargic. I couldn't even lift my finger. Bang. It was only after I heard the sound of the door closing that I managed to recover from the abnormal state. Breaking into a cold sweat, I tried my best to regain my composure, but look at this donkey getting caught looking at Professor Longburn. Ha ha ha, how pathetic. I know she's beautiful, but how is a bottom ranker like you worthy of her? 3 individuals surrounded the area where I was sitting, causing me to frown. What's going on? Why were they suddenly picking on me? Usually, they would just say some sarcastic remarks and leave, but now it felt like they were coming at me more aggressively than ever before. It was like they were purposely targeting me. Right. How could I forget? Slightly turning my head to the left side of the classroom, I could see Arnold sitting with his arms crossed looking at the front of the classroom indifferently. What's going on? Cat, got your tongue? Pushing my left shoulder, a rather lanky individual that seemed to be the leader of the group asked. Why are you looking at Professor Longburn with such disgusting eyes? I know the best way to deal with these kinds of people. Hey, you deaf or something? Say something. Since you couldn't fight in schools, I could just ignore him and get along with my day. If you're caught fighting in school, depending on how serious the violation was, you could potentially be expelled from the academy. Moreover, since my ranking was so low, I doubt they would bother keeping a troublemaking student like me. Oi. I'm talking to you, moron. Bro, I don't think he's ignoring you, I think he's just too terrified to even speak. Yeah, what a moron. Think whatever you want, just don't bother me. Grumbling to myself, I stood up and packed my stuff up. You leaving? Putting my bag on my back, I stepped to the side and tried to walk away, but not so fast. Who told you I'll let you run like that? Looking at him with cold eyes, I coldly spoke. Move. Yubnos to me, after nearly dying inside of the dungeon, my demeanor had become slightly colder. Slightly surprised by my response, the leader of the group laughed. He, who do you think you are to make me move? Sigh. Letting out a sigh, I tried to push my way through the trio, but it was to no avail. You think you can pass without my permission? Seeing that the situation was becoming unfavorable for me, I dropped my bag back on my desk and sat down. I really wished fighting was allowed, but since I couldn't afford to be expelled, I could only silently endure their harassment. Taking out my phone, I loaded a game and started playing it. Seeing me sit down, the trio initially smirked with a sense of superiority, but as soon as I started playing my game, their smiles faded away, and their complexion turned grim. You. Trembling, the leader pointed his finger at me, trying his best to suppress his rage. Looking up at him, I tilted my head and asked. Need something from me? How dare you make fun of me? Seemingly having lost all sense of reason, the leader of the group tried to assault me, but just as he was about to hit me, his two friends held him back. Stop, Richard. You might get expelled for this. Don't do this, Richard. So his name was Richard. MHHH. Never heard of him. After being restrained by his friends, Richard managed to calm down before staring at me with hatred. You will pay for making fun of me. Hold on a second. Pinching the middle of my brows, I let out another exhausted sigh. Let me get this straight. You're mad at me because I ignored you. Taken aback for a second, Richard processed what I said before looking down at me with disgust. You lowly rancor, you think you're worthy of my anger. No, you clearly were angry. Even a stupid person could realize that. I'll kill you. No, Richard, stop. Stop, Richard. Dumbfounded, I stared at Richard being restrained again. Was this some sort of comedy skit? Were all minor characters supposed to be dumb or something? Huff, I'll remember this. Glaring at me, Richard, who was seemingly out of breath, threatened me with a third-rate villain quote. Please don't. I'll kill you. Richard, don't. Richard. Please stop, I can't take it anymore. PFFFF. Ha 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 ha. Before I knew it, I found myself laughing hysterically at their antics. I was laughing so hard that tears started gathering in the corner of my eyes. I haven't laughed this hard since coming to this world. It was somehow refreshing. Suddenly being thrown into my own novel, although I tried my best not to show it, I had built up a lot of stress. From the very beginning since arriving here, I had been constantly working towards my goal. From getting the seed of limit, Keiki style, entering the black market, and almost losing my life against a Baron-ranked demon. I had been constantly risking my life. My sudden burst of laughter was not just laughter that stemmed from Richard's group stupidity, but it was also a laugh that swept some of my worries away. Although my journey towards the top was going to become tougher from now on, I should enjoy every free moment that I could get. Although this world was tough, it was still much better than my old world where I was silently waiting for death to come with every passing day. There were times when one just needed to let go of their worries and just relax. Looking at Richard, who was being restrained by his two friends, the corners of my mouth involuntarily pulled upwards. Seeing me laugh, as if a switch had been flipped, all three of them stopped at the same time. Is he laughing at us? Is this lowly rancor looking down on us? Is he treating us like some sort of clowns? Somehow I feel like I did something I shouldn't have. It seems like my laughter had wounded their pride. Feeling their intense glare, I pretty much knew that they were going to assault me. It was fine before because Richard was being restrained, but now that all three of them wished to beat me up, a fight was inevitable. You think this is funny? Do we look like a joke to you? Approaching me with intense hatred in their eyes, I could see from their eyes that they no longer cared about the repercussions. All that was reflected in their eyes was me. But just as they were about to attack me, a stern voice interrupted them. Let's leave it at that, shall we? Stopping right before me, the trio halted their movement and turned towards the voice that told them to stop. Who are you to Kevin? Turning around and figuring out whose voice it was, the trio froze on the spot. Being in a society where rank meant everything, they were overcome with fear and couldn't stop trembling as soon as they saw who was speaking to them. Kevin Voss, the first-year number 1 ranked student. Weary must let him know his place. As his voice trembled, Richard spoke to Kevin. And what did he do exactly? Overwhelmed by Kevin's charisma, Richard started fumbling on his words. Placing his hand on Richard's shoulder, Kevin patted him a couple of times. Let's leave it here, okay? Repeatedly nodding his head, Richard and his group immediately fled the scene. Seeing this happening before me, I couldn't help but slightly admire Kevin, who with just a few words made the trio run. I have to say, there were definitely perks in standing out. Like being able to swiftly deal with low-level characters with just a few words. But in hindsight, facing low-level charters was much better than dealing with annoying high-level ones. So I was still going to try my best to remain as hidden as possible. Thank you for your help. Standing up, I put my bag on my back and expressed my gratitude to Kevin, who simply nodded his head in acknowledgement. Finally free, I quickly left the classroom and headed towards my dorm. The Author's POV. Chapter 36, Elective 2. Thank you for your help. After expressing his gratitude, Ren directly left the classroom. Staring at the departing figure of the student who he had just helped for a brief moment, Kevin turned around and returned to his seat. Taking out his bag, Kevin packed up his stuff. Just as he was about to finish packing up, a handsome individual whose looks rivaled that of a top celebrity calmly looked down on him. What did you do that for? What do you mean? Tilting his head, Kevin questioningly looked at Jean. Why are you helping a pathetic loser like him? Frowning at Jin's choice of words, Kevin secretly shook his head and responded. Picking on someone weaker than you is more pathetic in my opinion. Humph, you should already how the world works by now. Snorting at Kevin's comment in disdain, Jean turned around and went towards Arnold, who was sitting 2 rows ahead of Kevin. Don't waste your time on helping losers like him. It's beneath you. Just ignore him. Just as Kevin was about to rebuke him, a beautiful voice entered his ears, prompting him to turn his head around. With her short brown hair accompanied by her porcelain white skin, Emma stood there looking up at Kevin, who was half a head taller than her. He's an idiot, so ignore him. But just leave it at that. He's just gonna ignore whatever you say anyway, so there's no point in arguing with him. Turning around, Emma left towards the exit of the classroom. You coming? Ah, yes. Sighing, Kevin took his bag and followed Emma out of the classroom. Since he was still not used to this place, Kevin had asked Emma to guide him during the elective fair. Catching up to her, Kevin walked side by side with Emma. Normally, a person would have been extremely happy to walk next to such a beautiful girl, but it was extremely uncomfortable to Kevin, who was not used to this much attention. Since his parents' death, Kevin preferred staying out of people's sight, hence why he was not used to the stairs. But unbeknownst to him, they weren't just looking at Emma, but at him too. His looks, which rivaled Jin's, perfectly matched Emma's breathtaking beauty, making everyone who saw them walking together sigh in admiration. You'll get used to it. Huh, excuse me. I mean, you'll get used to stairs soon enough. Oh. Okay, but why do I need to get used to the stairs? Aren't they just staring at you? Shaking her head as if she was looking at an idiot, Emma picked up her pace. Sigh, whatever, do you have an elective you want to join in mind? Not really, I was thinking of joining some sort of combat-related elective since from what I've seen there isn't anything in particular that attracts my attention. Cocking her head to the side to better hear what Kevin was saying, Emma's auburn hair, which was moderately short, lightly rested on top of her shoulders, muting the azure blue uniform. Hearing Kevin's response, Emma couldn't help but roll her eyes as she pinched the middle of her brows. Is all you do training? Not really, I just thought that any other elective would have been a waste of time. Well, I don't think it's my place to say what you should choose and what you shouldn't, but I do urge you to think about it more thoroughly. Will do. Stopping, Emma's eyes narrowed. Turning around, she looked back at Kevin with a serious expression and spoke. No, I don't think you do. Noticing Emma's behavior and expression, Kevin's back unconsciously straightened as he listened attentively. Electives have a much deeper meaning than you think, especially for someone as talented as you. If you just randomly choose an elective and it happens to be under a faction, even if you don't plan on entering the faction, they will still consider you as a part of them. Especially since it's you. Moreover, once you join a faction, you will officially be an enemy of all other factions that are against the faction which you are a part of. Keep in mind that once you entered a faction, even if you didn't mean to, if you wish to exit, you must prepare yourself to make an enemy of that faction. Hearing Emma's explanation, Kevin became dumbfounded as cold sweat dripped from his back. All of this just for joining an elective? Poking Kevin's chest with her finger, Emma looked at Kevin seriously. Yes, so don't just carelessly join an elective. Repeatedly nodding his head, Kevin promised Emma to be careful when selecting an elective. Seeing her turn around, although Kevin didn't show it, he was extremely thankful to Emma who chose to help him out of her own volition. Kevin already knew that Emma had already chosen her elective, and was just doing him a favor. Although they had only known each other for about 3 weeks, Kevin already considered Emma a good friend. They first met when entering their boarding apartments. It was also at the same time he met Jean, Amanda, and Melissa. Since they were in the same building, they had no choice but to interact with each other, and from there they had gotten along with each other well. Well, there were a couple of ups and downs in the beginning as Jean displayed obvious hostility against Kevin. Looking back at the previous events, Kevin had a hunch it had something to do with Melissa, as Jin's hostility would shoot up a notch whenever he interacted with her, but he didn't want to pry too deeply. Thus as such, because of Jin, the atmosphere in the dorm was quite tense. But fortunately, thanks to Emma, who got along with everyone, the awkward atmosphere dissipated and everyone managed to get along with each other. It could be said that Emma was the key that linked everyone in the dorm. If it weren't for her, who knows if Kevin would have even bothered talking to Jin. Hey, you listening? Snapping him out of his thoughts was the figure of Emma, who had stopped walking and was looking at him with an annoyed pout. Cute. Kevin thought as he resisted the urge to smile at her expression. I feel like you're thinking of something that would make me extremely annoyed. Exclamation point. Opening his eyes wide, Kevin turned his head to the side and pretended to have not heard anything. Ah. So you were. Don't know what you're talking about. Kevin's outward expression was calm and expressionless, but on the inside, Kevin felt a storm of thoughts and emotions. How in the world is she able to read my mind? Is this what they call a woman's intuition? Terrifying. Narrowing her eyes and scrutinizing Kevin, who tried his best to maintain his poker face, Emma shook her head and opened a huge door that led to the outside. I'll let this one go, now follow me. Led by Emma, Kevin exited the building and strolled around the academy campus. Wow, this is a lot busier than I expected. An ocean of students was swarming the campus as they each made their way towards the elective fair. Some were leisurely strolling around the campus with their friends, some were sitting in the patches of green around the campus, and others were frantically rushing towards the stalls in the elective fair. If it weren't for the fact that for some odd reason some of the students were going out of their way to step away from their path, reaching the location where the elective fair was being held was not going to be as unobstructed as it was now. Where exactly are we going? Section B. Pausing slightly, Kevin's eyes widened a little bit. Section B. Isn't that the professor area? It's precisely because it's the professor area that the elective fair is taking place there. Dumbfounded by her response, Kevin looked at Emma in confusion. How does that make sense? Rolling her eyes, Emma continued walking forward, ignoring Kevin, who was dumbly staring at her. Finally, after seeing that Kevin still had not understood, Emma sighed and spoke. Didn't I mention before about the deeper meaning behind electives? Nodding his head, Kevin replied, right, but how does that relate to the fact that the fair is in Section B? Because professors are also part of a faction. Halting his steps, Kevin took a moment to process what Emma had said. If what Emma had said was true, then choosing an elective was a far more serious matter than he had originally thought. If even the professors were trying to influence the elective fair, then it meant that the hidden politics in the academy were rooted deeper than he had previously thought. Although professors are technically no longer part of a faction, that still did not mean that they couldn't indirectly help the faction that they used to be a part of. Though they may no longer be a part of a faction, their loyalty is still there. If they wanted to, they could force students to join their faction by abusing their authority and make their lives harder. Seeing how Kevin's complexion was becoming grimmer by the second, Emma realized her mistake and tried to encourage him. But you don't need to worry about that. Although you're extremely sought after, they won't carelessly try to force you to join a faction, as you are protected by the school. Moreover, you have me, Amanda, Melissa, and that guy protecting you. No professor would dare to mess with you with our backing. Seeing how she was frantically coming up with excuses to make him feel better, Kevin felt warm in his heart. Having spent most of his life in solitude, having friends that supported him and helped him in times of trouble was a new feeling for him. He couldn't say he disliked it. Thank you. For what? Taken aback by Kevin's strange attitude, Emma took a step back. You're not falling for me, right? I'm sorry, but I don't plan on dating right now. There goes all the goodwill he had for her. Hey, what's with that disgusted face? I was just joking. But still, the fact you are looking at a beauty like me with that kind of face irritates me. Narcissistic, aren't we? No, I'm just acknowledging the truth. Dumbfounded by her fast response, Kevin was momentarily left speechless as he did not know how to respond to her. Ignoring Kevin, who was too speechless to talk, Emma continued. My beauty aside, you still have to be careful when interacting with the professors, as although they can't touch you, they can still indirectly try to make your life harder if they hold a grudge against you. GHHH, why does everything have to be so annoying? Actually, now that I think about it, a few professors already hold a grudge against you. What? How? What did I do? What didn't you do? I mean, you suddenly showed up out of nowhere and bulldozed your way to the first rank. You pretty much humiliated those that believed that bloodlines or backing was the most important factor in being the best. Your existence alone is an eyesore for them. Of course, they built a grudge against you. Letting out a pained groan, Kevin couldn't help but curse at his own stupidity. The only reason why he tried his best for the test was that he had still not figured out that he was strong. Having been living isolated from society since the death of his parents, he didn't know that with the skills that he had developed thanks to the cheat-like system, he could have been considered as one of the bests of his generation. He had thought that since some of the rich second-generation kids had access to top-end facilities, they would have surely been stronger than him. But he had severely underestimated how much of a cheat the system was. Not only did it provide Kevin with the best training regime, but it also rewarded him with top-end skills, stats increase, and artifacts at the completion of each mission. By the time that admissions for the lock were open, he had already grown to be a prodigy. Had he known this fact, he wouldn't have tried as hard as he did during the examination. I mean, since coming to the lock, Kevin had been through many annoying situations where his rank 1 status had drawn too much unwanted attention. If only he had known. Seeing how distressed Kevin was, Emma, who took pity on him, decided to change the topic to relieve his mind from the troublesome problems. The sky is nice and blue, right? Excuse me. The clouds sure are fluffy. Are you okay? Never been better. How about you? What about me? I'm more worried about you, who is being weird. Back to your normal self. Finally realizing Emma's intention, Kevin blushed in embarrassment as he thanked her. Ah, thank you. No probs, just don't think about all that annoying stuff. At worst you'll just have some minor troubles. You may have not realized it yet, but that number 1 rank is as much of a burden as it is a shield. With it, you don't have to worry about people openly doing something to you, and in fact, even if you haven't noticed it yet, you are constantly under the protection of the Academy. The number 1 rank is not just a title, it's a representation of hope, a light that shines down this godforsaken world, and guide us to true freedom. Looking at Kevin straight in his eyes, Emma lightly punched his shoulder as she flashed a stunning smile. So instead of worrying, be proud of what you've accomplished and destroy anything that dares obstruct your path to success. The Author's POV. Chapter 37, Elective 3. Wow, there's a lot more people than I had originally thought. I'd have to agree with you on that one. As Kevin and Emma arrived outside of Section B, a crowd of students was swarming the entrance, making it hard to see what was ahead. Each student was sporting a different colored uniform which ranged from azure blue, dark green, and blood red, representing the year they were in. A 3-meter-tall wall surrounded the whole of Section B, and on top of the wall, an invisible high-voltage electrical line was installed, preventing anyone from trying to sneak into the compound. In order to enter the compound, 4 gates, which were respectively allocated according to the cardinal points, north, south, east, west, were tightly guarded by the staff hired by the Academy. Because the Academy was mainly a medium to nurture talented individuals which would later be the future pillars of humanity, the information regarding the students was tightly secured by the Academy. If the information were to be passed to the wrong hands, potentially talented heroes that have shown good promise during their academic stay might become the target of demons and villains, which could result in them prematurely dying before their talent could leave an impact on society. This was exactly what the Academy didn't want, and hence why they invested heavily in security for Section B. Excluding the professors, who were all respectively strong heroes, the security alone comprised of B and C ranked heroes. Section B was practically one of the safest areas within the Academy. After 10 minutes, Emma and Kevin were finally able to arrive at the entrance of the compound. The lines were split into 3, and at the end of each line, a student with a red blazer was handing leaflets to every person who entered the compound. Welcome to the elective fair. Approaching Kevin and Emma, a blonde individual elegantly handed them a leaflet with a gentle yet confident smile on his face. Thank you. Thank you. Without thinking much, Emma and Kevin took the leaflet and left, resulting in the blonde individual's smile to momentarily falter. Excuse me, freshman. Quickly regaining his composure, the blonde individual hastily moved in front of Kevin and Emma, obstructing their path. Suddenly being blocked out of nowhere, both Kevin and Emma couldn't help but frown as they scrutinized the person before them. Although he wasn't as handsome as Kevin, he could have been regarded as a fairly handsome individual with his relatively well-proportioned features, blue eyes, and confident demeanor. What do you need? Annoyed, Emma didn't try to hide her displeasure as she lightly glared in his direction. Smiling amiably, taking no notice of Emma's attitude, the blonde individual couldn't help but take a couple of glances at Emma, evidently stunned by her beauty. Without even acknowledging nor glancing in Kevin's direction, the blonde individual focused his whole attention on Emma almost as if he was enchanted by her beauty. "Let me introduce myself, my name is Fabian Parker, third year, ranked 14, may I have the honor of knowing this beautiful girl's name?" As he introduced himself, the undisguised pride in his tone couldn't be concealed as his smile deepened and his back straightened. His eyes, which now fully focused on Emma, couldn't hide the desire masked within them as he took one step closer to her. "That's enough." Placing his hand in front of Emma, blocking Fabian from approaching her, Kevin glared at him. "Can't you see you're bothering her? Who are you?" Finally noticing Kevin's presence, Fabian couldn't hide his displeasure, as his head snapped in his direction. "How dare you block this one's path? You're being annoying. Quickly move out of my way or don't blame me for being impolite." Frowning, just as Kevin was about to get angry, a mocking voice disrupted their confrontation as Emma walked in front of Kevin. "If you don't fuck off from my sight, don't blame me for being rude." Imitating Fabian's tone, Emma arrived right in front of Fabian and lightly smiled. Startled by Emma's outburst, Fabian couldn't find any words to say, resulting in his face crumping up. "Got nothing to say?" Raising her brow, Emma looked at Fabian provocatively. "You dare?" Trembling, Fabian pointed his finger in Emma's direction as he struggled to contain his anger. Since coming to the academy, no, more precisely, his whole life, Fabian had never been this humiliated. Being born from the prestigious Parker family, which held a tremendous amount of wealth and influence, every girl who he had ever approached threw themselves at him. Never in his 19 years of life did someone disrespect him so much. Especially from a couple of first years. Apart from those who were higher ranked than him, and had a similar amount of influence as his family, no one had the right to look down on him. He, Fabian Parker, heir of the Parker conglomerate with a net worth of over $1 trillion, was actually being humiliated in front of everybody like this. Does this slut think that just because she's pretty she can mess with me? It seems like you don't hold your seniors in regard. Good, good. Clapping his hands a couple of times, Fabian's face darkened and his previous gentlemanly demeanor completely vanished. "Ah." Covering her mouth, Emma exaggeratedly looked at Fabian and exclaimed, "I am sorry. I didn't realize you were a senior. I mean..." Looking at Fabian up and down, Emma shook her head. "The way you talked made me think you were a spoiled brat, so I instantly assumed you were the same year as me." She's definitely enjoying this. Watching Emma, who acted like she was wronged, Kevin couldn't help but bitterly smile. What a drama queen. She could have just ignored him and told him who she was, as her background was enough of a deterrence for 99% of the people attending the academy, but she chose not to, meaning that she was trying to humiliate him publicly. Looking around, Kevin noticed a small crowd that had already started gathering around them due to Emma's loud voice. Sighing, Kevin started doubting whether asking Emma to help him was the right decision. Noticing the crowd that had started gathering around them, Fabian, who was on the verge of exploding, forcefully suppressed his anger and alternatively looked at Emma and Kevin. "It seems like the new first years are in need of disciplining, huh?" Vam. As soon as he finished his sentence, massive pressure engulfed the surroundings while blue light started emanating from Fabian's body. GHH. What's going on? The crowd, which had gathered due to the commotion, suddenly felt an immense pressure bearing down on them, and because they were caught off guard due to the suddenness of the attack, most of the people found themselves sprawled on the floor struggling to move. Kevin and Emma, who were the ones that were bearing the full brunt of the force, took a knee to the ground as their legs gave out due to the immense pressure they were facing. Although both Kevin and Emma were extremely talented, they were in no way a match to a third-year student who had been vigorously training for 3 years under the care of the academy. Even Kevin, who could have been regarded as one of the best even amongst the second years, felt an unimaginable pressure bearing down on him. Detecting hostile force. Would you like to activate skill, overdrive? Y/N. And no. Dismissing the system message that appeared anytime a hostile force was detected, Kevin looked up at Fabian, who was slowly walking towards Emma. Not so proud now, huh? PFFTT, you don't know who you're messing with. Oh. And how so? Raising his brow, Fabian knelt down at Emma's eye level and lightly held her chin up with his fingers. Feeling Fabian's finger touching her chin, Emma momentarily froze before opening her eyes wide in disbelief. I give you 3 seconds to let go of me before things get really serious. Oh. Tilting his head, Fabian couldn't help but lightly chuckle as his hand gripped Emma's cheeks. Do tell me what you're going to do to me. How dare you? Feeling Fabian's hand gripping onto her face, Emma's final restraint disappeared, and just when she was about to call her guards, a powerful voice reverberated across the surroundings. "Stop!" Right after the shout, the pressure that was bearing down on everyone disappeared, and a tall individual whose skin was on the darker side appeared before the crowd. He had braids that extended all the way to his shoulders, and his bulging muscles that were the size of a football made one wonder if he was a human. "Stop this farce at once." Arriving in front of Fabian, the individual who seemed to be the instructor overlooking this area appeared before Fabian and loudly screamed at his face. "Wh-at." Feeling the spit that was being spewed on his face by the instructor as he shouted, Fabian, who couldn't believe his eyes, struggled to speak for a couple of seconds. Actually, he knew this individual. Hero rank 459 Jerome Wilson, aka Diamond Destroyer, a rather well-known hero famed for his tremendous strength. His name, Diamond Destroyer, stemmed from how he was able to crush diamonds with his bare hands. If not for his low agility, Jerome could have been ranked in the top 300. Noticing that he was being scolded by instructor Jerome, Fabian was so shocked that he couldn't utter a single word. The reason he was shocked was not because he was being scolded, but rather by whom he was being scolded. Diamond Destroyer, who he had known since young, was actually supposed to be an individual planted by his family to secretly support him during his stay in the academy. Yet here he was berating him in front of everyone. "Come to my office right now." Without leaving any time for Fabian to collect himself, Jerome grabbed him by the neck and immediately left without even looking at Kevin and Emma. Looking at the instructor who hastily brought Fabian away, Kevin stood up. Had he been a split second slower, Kevin would have been forced to take action. "Are you all right?" Extending his hand towards Emma to help her stand up, Kevin had a troubled look on his face as he looked at the people around him groaning in pain on the floor. Without responding to Kevin, Emma emotionlessly walked towards the entrance. Reading the mood, Kevin shut up and followed her. It seems like a storm was brewing. "Release me at once." After finding a relatively secluded area, Jerome, who was still holding onto Fabian, who was flaying in his arms, finally let go of him. "Kuh, how dare you do this me?" Holding onto his neck, Fabian glared at Jerome, who had a tired look on his face. "How dare you lay your filthy hands on me? Wait till I tell D. Young master," shouted Jerome as veins could be seen visibly bulging from his head. Stopping abruptly, Fabian looked at Jerome in disbelief, as never in his whole life did he see him ever lose his cool like this. Sorry. Realizing what he had just done, Jerome let out a long sigh and apologized to Fabian. Covering his face, Jerome took out his phone and quickly dialed a number. "Young master, you have seriously screwed up this time." "Wh-at?" Noticing that things weren't right, Fabian's voice became slightly rushed as he looked at Jerome, who was pacing back and forth in front of him. "Hello." Finally, after a couple of seconds, a cold voice full of authority entered Jerome's ears. "Master, there's been an emergency." "What happened?" It's regarding young master." "What did he do?" "A conflict between him and the Rochefield child occurred during the elective fair, and judging from how they operate, things might become difficult very soon. Bring that child home, I'll handle the rest." Pausing for a moment, the voice behind the phone became slightly colder before giving one last command and hanging up. Click. Rochefield. Staring at Jerome in disbelief, Fabian looked as if he had lost his soul. Never in a million years did he imagine that the child he was eyeing was actually the princess of the Rochefield clan, and whose father was the vice director of the union. No wonder she was so arrogant. No wonder she didn't even flinch at the mention of his family's name. Although her family was about the same strength as his family, because her father worked in the union, if he wanted to, he could immediately make things harder for the Parker family, resulting in 7 to 8 digits losses. Realizing what he had done, Fabian powerlessly slumped on the ground as he dazedly looked at the sky. I fucked up big time. The Author's POV. Chapter 38, Elective, 4. Are you sure you're all right? Passing by stalls without even glancing at them, Kevin worriedly looked at Emma, who remained silent throughout the whole time they were walking. After that accident, Emma had a gloomy air around her. It felt as if she had erected a tall barrier that prevented anyone from approaching her. Hey! Suddenly Emma stopped walking. Raising her hand slightly, she wiped away the corner of her mouth. Looking down, her azure blue uniform now had a small red stain on it. Noticing it, Emma quickly pulled her hand back to hide the small stain. But although Emma tried to be subtle with her actions, it couldn't escape Kevin's eyes, which immediately widened in shock. Shit. Grabbing her hand, Kevin immediately dragged her out of the elective fair. It seemed like the earlier confrontation had resulted in Emma sustaining some internal injuries. The fact that she refused to kneel even under all of that pressure goes to show how much willpower and determination she had. Fabian's rank was most likely around the C range, which was around 2 ranks higher than Emma, whose rank was still E, borderline E rank. Subjected to such pressure, Emma was bound to suffer internal injuries. If not for the fact that Kevin's rank was E plus borderline D rank, he too would have suffered serious internal injuries. Smack. Don't touch me. Raising her voice, Emma smacked Kevin's hand away. A split second after realizing what she had done, Emma froze and lowered her head in shame. I am sorry. It's all right. Not taking it to heart, Kevin stopped and looked at Emma. Her complexion had become a lot paler than before, and looking at her carefully now, Kevin could see Emma slightly shivering. Almost as if she was suffering from extreme cold. Shit, how come I didn't notice this before? Cursing at himself, Kevin thought for a bit before gritting his teeth. Here. Taking out a light green potion from his inventory, Kevin handed it to Emma. This potion was one of the rewards that he had gotten after completing a quest that the system had given him. He had saved it in case he got severely hurt, but seeing Emma suffering, Kevin couldn't control his impulse and decide to give it to her. In the first place, the only reason she got hurt was because of him. If he had not asked her to bring him around for the elective fair, none of this would have happened. I appreciate your concern. Looking at the potion Kevin had given her, Emma was slightly touched, but she still rejected it. I insist. Noticing Emma's stubbornness, Kevin tried to forcefully put the potion in her hand, only to be rejected by her once again. Seeing that he could do nothing to make her take the potion, Kevin gave up. Her hand, which was slightly trembling, reached out for her pocket. Taking out her phone, she quickly dialed a number. After a couple of rings, a pleasant and gentle voice could be heard from the other side of the phone. Young miss, how may I help you? I need someone to pick me up. Is something wrong, miss? Everything is fine, please come and pick me up. As you wish, young miss, I will immediately dispatch someone to pick you up. Sensing something, the lady on the other side of the phone immediately called for someone to go to Emma's location. Tack. Soon after hanging up her phone, a butler calmly walked in their direction. He donned a neat black blazer with a slight opening where his white unwrinkled shirt could be seen. A black bow tie hugged his neck and accompanied by his well-polished shoes that shined under the campus light, further added to his elegance. He had a full set of white hair which was a result of his age. At the edge of his eyes, which were obsidian black, wrinkles that extended all the way to his upper cheeks could be seen. Lastly, what stood out the most about him was his nicely trimmed mustache that rested below his nose. Young miss. Elegantly bowing in front of Emma, the butler greeted Emma. Uncle Norman, please bring me home. Noticing that something wasn't right, Norman looked up and saw Emma's pale face. Miss. Rushing in to support her, Norman grabbed her shoulders in a panic. I'm fine khhh. Seeing the panic in Norman's eyes, Emma tried to brush it off, but as soon as she started speaking, a red trail of blood fell from her nose. Soon she passed out in Norman's arms. Miss. Lightly shaking Emma's body, Norman looked around in panic. Taking out his phone, he quickly called for backup. After he finished calling for backup, he gently laid Emma on a bench. After making sure that Emma was okay, Norman's demeanor completely changed as he coldly looked at Kevin and asked, "Tell me what happened." Helplessly nodding his head, Kevin quickly recounted what had happened moments before. As he listened attentively to Kevin recounting about the incident with Fabian, Norman's face became gloomier by the second. The Parkers, good. Standing up, an extremely strong bloodlust permeated the surrounding, suffocating Kevin. Fortunately, Norman was controlling his bloodlust as it could only be felt within a certain radius. If one of those weaker students were to suddenly be exposed to this bloodlust, they would have suffered mental trauma. Soon, 2 black cars arrived at the front of Section B where a bunch of individuals with black suits came out. Forming a line, they pushed away all students that were trying to take a look at what happened. Carrying Emma in his arms, Norman looked back at Kevin and said, "Tell the dorm supervisor that Emma will be absent for at least a couple of days." Nodding his head helplessly, Kevin agreed. Clank. Closing the door to the cars soon sped into the distance. Staring at the departing cars, Kevin fell into deep thought before going back into the dorm. It seems like he'll have to visit the elective fair another time. Parker Tower, Ashton City. It was currently nighttime in Ashton City, and the lights coming from the cars drifting in the distance formed beautiful yellow and red stripes that stretched all the way to the horizon. Inside of a large office, on the top floor of a tall glass building, the silhouette of a man looking down the busy streets of Ashton City could be seen. That is all. Standing a few steps behind the man, a butler kneeled on the floor as he read the report in his hand. After the butler read the report, a deathly silence permeated the room. Soon the silence was disrupted by the cold voice of the silhouette standing by the window side of the office. Push the plan forward. Sir. Abruptly standing up, the butler immediately tried to voice his objection. K-Huck. But before he could do that, the butler found himself facing the ground as an unimaginable pressure bore down on him. No matter how much he struggled, he could not move. This was especially shocking since the butler himself was a B-rank hero. The fact that he could not move despite his high rank goes to show how powerful the individual he was serving was. Do as you're told. Without looking back, the silhouette once again spoke. This time, the butler didn't even dare to talk back as he could only nod his head on the floor. Soon the pressure died down and the butler was able to regain his mobility. Call him to my room. As the butler was ready to leave the room, his master spoke once again. Yes, master. Clank. Elegantly bowing his body forward, the butler left the office. Soon, the office became enveloped in silence as only the sound of the man's breathing could be heard. Knock. Knock. Father. The tranquil atmosphere was soon broken by the sound of a knock. The door slowly opened and a face could be seen peeking from the other side of the door. Fabian, who was on the other side of the door, trembled all over as he waited for his father's permission to enter the room. His previous arrogance could no longer be seen as he resembled a scared rabbit trapped in a cage. Enter. Clank. Obediently listening to his father, Fabian carefully entered the room and closed the door behind him. Soon an awkward silence enveloped the room. Sweat could be seen falling from Fabian's face as he stood with his back straight, not daring to sit down. Unable to stand the tense atmosphere anymore, Fabian was the first to break the silence. Father. Turning around, the features of the silhouette were revealed under the room's lights. His facial features were similar to that of Fabian, however, despite his age, which was in the late 50s, there were no wrinkles on his face. If someone did not know about his age, they could have easily mistaken him for a 20-year-old college student. What separated him from a regular student was his distinct sense of authority that could be felt from his demeanor. It felt as if he was a judge that dictated who was guilty and who was innocent. Gulp. Swallowing a large mouthful of saliva, Fabian waited for his father to respond. How do you plan to fix your mistake? Why, yes. Hearing his dad's cold voice, Fabian stood up straight and fumbled on his words. He was too nervous to speak. Frankly, Fabian since young had rarely ever spoken with his father. He was the third in line of the Parker family, and wasn't doted on as much as his brothers. However, he still had everything. His family, which was passed on for generations, could be considered as one of the strongest in the current human domain. They managed to rise from the bottom to where they were now thanks to their business-oriented mentality. The Parker conglomerate was responsible for selling and trading cores, monster parts, and skills. They had so much money that could last each member for generations. Being neglected, Fabian spent lavishly to substitute the missing paternal love that he never received from his parents. On the off chance that he did meet his father, he would always be intimidated by his presence, which exuded authority. To him, his father never felt like a real father, he felt more like his boss. I want you to finish what you started. Seeing that his son was still too timid to hold a conversation with him, Michael Parker, the current CEO of the Parker conglomerate, spoke up. Not expecting what his father was telling him, Fabian looked at his father in confusion. You heard me clear, I want you to finish what you started. Be but waldient that start conflict with the Rochefield family. Smirking coldly, Michael Parker looked at his son in contempt. The deed has already been done, you think they'll do nothing after what you've done. Hearing his father's words, Fabian lowered his head. He was right, now that everything had already started it was too late to regret it. I've been planning this for a while, you've only pushed forward the inevitable. So now I want you to go through with it to the end, I want you to thoroughly crush Emma Rochefield. Staring at his son, Michael Parker slowly walked next to him and patted his shoulder. Prove your worth. Feeling his father's large hands, Fabian felt something inside of him rise. It was something that he had never felt before, reliance. As if a fire had suddenly ignited inside of his heart, Fabian looked at his father in the eyes and asked. But if I target her, wouldn't that make me the prime target of the Roche field? Smiling slightly, Michael turned back to look at the busy streets of Ashton City. You have to mask your actions, hire some people to create conflict within the academy so that you can veil your true target. Emma Rochefield. Once everyone is too distracted with the conflicts, you will strike and deal a fatal blow to the Rochefield family's only successor. Staring at the busy streets of Ashton City, Michael Parker grinned coldly. Looking at the Rochefield Tower not so far in the distance, Michael Parker raised his hand and slowly clenched it. It's about time that the Parker family got rid of the Rochefield family. The Author's POV. Chapter 39, Elective, 5. Inside of a large room decorated in pink, with a large king-sized bed in the middle, laid a stunning young girl with short brown hair that scattered all over her pillow. She was currently lying down beneath a set of thin blankets that could not hide the outlines of her body. Sitting next to her, a tall man with similar colored hair, nervously looked at the young girl who was resting on the bed. Her skin, which was flawless, was currently pale, and if not for the fact that her breathing was stable, someone could have easily mistaken her for a dying patient. At that moment, Emma opened her eyes. Oliver Rochefield, Emma's father, and the man that was in the room, noticing Emma's eyes opening, immediately shot up and called for a doctor. You're up. How are you holding up? Fine. Emma sat up on the bed and bitterly smiled at her father's worried expression. Soon a doctor came running in to check her pulse, but Emma pushed him away with a smile. It's fine, Dad. Nothing serious happened. Really? Of course. Do I look like someone who would get injured so easily? Plus, didn't the doctor already confirm I was fine? I did. Hearing Emma mention him, the doctor lightly shuddered and hurriedly nodded. Oliver Rochefield was a powerful figure who had many titles to his name. Flame Overlord Oliver Rochefield, 89th in the hero ranking, Ashton City Mayor and Vice Director of the Union. Each title more fearsome than the other. The doctor knew that being on this man's bad side would only make his life more difficult. Looking at his daughter up and down a couple of more times, Oliver eventually relented and gestured for the doctor to leave. She seems fine, so you can go now. Yes, sir. The doctor, without skipping a beat, hurriedly ran out of the room. Looking at the closing door, Emma spoke briefly. Dad. Oliver Rochefield replied with a gentle tone. About the Parkers. Before Emma could finish speaking, the room's temperature increased dramatically. Dad. Noticing the changes happening around her, Emma quickly tried to stop her father. Dad, stop. Placing her hands on her father's cheeks, Emma tried her best to calm her father down. Despite being one of the strongest people in the human domain, Oliver Rochefield had one fatal weakness. His daughter. Ever since his wife's death 8 years ago, the only memento he had of his late wife was his daughter, Emma. Even though he was busy with his job, he always made sure to find enough time to spend it with his daughter. He doted on her a lot. Seeing her in this state, rage clouded Oliver's mind as he couldn't help but feel a stinging sensation hit his heart. It was only after he felt his daughter's warm, soft hands that his rage slowly started showing signs of subsiding. Dad, please stop. Ooh. Letting out a long breath, the room temperature returned to normal and Oliver bitterly smiled at his daughter. Only she could stop him from going on a rampage. Finally calming her dad down, Emma smiled in relief and slumped back into her bed. Sweetie, are you sure you're okay? I'm okay, I just need some rest. Okay, please don't push yourself. Tucking Emma in, Oliver stood up and prepared to leave. But just as he was about to leave, he felt a slight tug at the edge of his pants. Dad, you still didn't answer my previous question. Sigh, Emma, this matter is more serious than you think. Gently sitting on the bed next to Emma, Oliver slowly caressed her head. What do you mean? The Parkers have been eyeing our properties and resources for a long time now. If before they were reluctant to act because of my position, now that they know I will retaliate because of what happened, they will no longer have any restraints when dealing with us. Pausing slightly, Oliver held his daughter's soft hand tightly and said, So sweetie, rest well and return to the academy once you're fully healed. The academy is the safest place for you to be at the moment. Frowning for a bit, Emma looked at her father. His eyes, which held boundless love for her, were seeded with worry. Seeing this warmth filled her heart as she felt how much he worried about her. Tightening her grip of her father's large hand, Emma's frown lessened and she nodded. I understand. Smiling gently, Oliver gently kissed Emma on the cheek and left the room. As soon as Oliver left the room, his gentle demeanor completely vanished, and what replaced it was a cold and indifferent one. Norman. Yes, master. Turning his head towards Norman, who was patiently standing outside of Emma's room, Oliver instantly issued orders. Start liquidating all our unnecessary assets. I want 1 billion gathered by the end of the week. As you wish. Bowing down, Norman lightly smiled and left, leaving Oliver standing outside of Emma's door. Having known his master for a while, Norman knew exactly what he was planning. Normally, he would have been against it, as the consequences of a war against powerhouses was unimaginable, but thinking back at what had happened to Emma, his eyes narrowed and his pace increased. She was the Rochefield reverse scale. Seeing that Norman left, Oliver sighed and looked at his daughter's room. Gently caressing the door to Emma's room, Oliver turned around and silently spoke. If I don't deal substantial damage to the Parkers by the end of this, then I shall not be called Oliver Rochefield. Though his voice was quiet, it held boundless rage within it. Equals. Closing the book down, I lightly sighed. It seemed like things were going to get difficult from here on out. A lot has happened since my near-death experience. In about a week's time, Thobia's church will be assassinated. Since my life and death moment in the dungeon, I increased my training time from 5 hours a day to 9 hours a day. Whenever I had free time on my hands, I would train. It was only after I almost died that I realized that life was as fickle as it could be. Just a single moment and I could die. Only if I was stronger would I be able to live. Unbeknownst to me, my outlook on life had slowly started to change. I used to think that all I had to do was train and slowly follow along with the storyline. I had this babysitter type of mindset. Just follow the protagonist and cover for them if anything that was beyond the plotline happened. Those were my ambitions. Nothing else. But the further I stayed in this world, the more I realized that there was more to this world than just a story. The people, the beautiful sceneries, the professors, my classmates, everything around me was real. This was no longer a novel, and there were no second chances. If I learned something since reincarnating inside of my own novel was that I needed power. In the first place. If I had power, I wouldn't need to babysit the plotline. No, if I was stronger, then nothing could stop me from achieving what I wanted. Be it the protagonists, the Union, the Demon King, if I was stronger then no one could stop me from living the life that I desired. Though I still didn't plan on interfering with the main storyline, my previous ambition of just babysitting the protagonists was no longer there. I need to think more about myself than them. Did I want to go through another near-death experience again? No, I didn't. The feeling of having your life toyed with wasn't something I would want to go through again. No longer did I want to be chained by someone else. I wanted something for myself, and only through power could I achieve that. I may choose to remain low-key for now so that I could build power without getting into any unnecessary conflicts, but the day that I decided to expose my power to the world will be the day that the demons will shake at the mere mention of my name, Rendover. And in order to achieve this, I decided to remove every distraction around me. Soon I started training like crazy. Every day I would wake up early, go to the gym, take classes, eat, go to the gym and repeat. A thing that has become bothersome though was that the gym had started becoming fuller as the days went by. Moreover, the atmosphere in the gym was not right. About 2 weeks had passed since the events of the elective fair. And a tense atmosphere enveloped the whole academy, as the first, second, and third years started eyeing each other. This was mainly organized by Fabian, who hired people to start conflicts with the first years. In the first week, things weren't that bad as only small conflicts happened. However, past the first week, entering the second week, the conflicts started escalating to a whole new level. It first started when a second year beat up a first year for bumping into him. Soon, some of the enraged first years took it upon themselves to teach a lesson to the person responsible for the incident. A day after the first year was hospitalized, 3 second years were sent to the hospital heavily injured, including the one that hurt the first year, who was the one that had the heaviest injuries. Following that, the conflict started escalating more and more. It had gotten so bad that the teachers could no longer turn a blind eye on the situation and firmly stated that whoever was caught fighting within the academy would be expelled. With no exception. Regardless of rank or family background. Thanks to this announcement, the conflicts within the academy died down. Keyword. Within. This meant that once you stepped outside the academy boundary, it was free for all. Fortunately for me, I didn't really have anything to do outside of the academy, so I was fairly unaffected by this whole conflict. Moreover, since my rank was low, I was treated like crap regardless of whether they were juniors or seniors. No discrimination there. Another major thing that had happened was that the Parkers and the Rochefield had finally started acting against each other. The stock prices of each company fluctuated every day as businesses owned by both parties started going bankrupt left and right. It was total chaos. The conflicts were starting to escalate and soon will reach all the way to the academy. I wasn't sure how to feel about this. The atmosphere around the academy was so tense that it started affecting my training. Fortunately, because of my low-profile nature, I was still in the clear, for now. Click. Closing the door to my dorm, I walked towards my elective, food exploration. Yup, just like the name suggested, the elective I chose was an elective that focused on food. But don't get me wrong, this wasn't my first choice. In fact, it was probably one of my last choices. But because of all the conflicts within the academy where seniors would reject first years added with the multiple rejections I got due to my rank, I was left with no choice but to apply for this elective. An elective that mainly focused on food. Well, it wasn't that simple, but it was along that line. What made things worse was that this elective was the elective that Amanda took. By some sort of weird twist of fate, I ended up in the same elective as one of the main protagonists that I wanted to avoid. At this point, I was starting to doubt whether my plan to remain low-key would even be achieved, as I was constantly being put through situations where I would either interact with the main cast or fight against mid-novel bosses. Like seriously, what was wrong with this world? I was literally going through more hardship than the protagonist himself. The Author's POV. Chapter 40, Changes Happening in the Academy, 1. The elective was in room B17. When I entered, the rows of the classroom were already filled with students, most of which were wearing a familiar azure blue blazer. There were about 40 first years, of which 32 of them were girls. The reason for such disparity in gender probably had to do with the class president's bewitching appearance. After glancing at the room for a couple of seconds, I turned towards Amanda's direction and sat a few seats behind her. All the front row seats had been taken by the girls. Sitting down, I could smell a nice rose-like scent coming from her direction, promoting my nose to greedily take in the smell. After being exposed to this scent for 5 minutes, an elegant young man, with nicely combed hair, entered the classroom. He had a gentle smile on his face, and his looks could have been considered to be on the higher end of the spectrum. The club president finally showed up. Arriving in front of the podium, the young man calmly placed his stuff down and looked at all the students that had come. Smiling, he said, "Nice to meet you. I'm Elijah Turner. I am very pleased by your participation in our elective, food exploration." Elijah Turner, the current president of the elective and a third year. As he smiled, apart from Amanda, all the girls' faces flushed red in excitement. Rolling my eyes, I rested my head on my right arm and carefully looked at Elijah. Though the class may be ignorant about his true nature, I wasn't. Elijah Turner was a villain and Professor Thibault's second in command. Soon, several incidents would happen in the academy, including an incident involving Amanda. Elijah would be the mastermind behind it. Of course, I had no reason to make trouble for myself by shouting, "This guy is a villain," alongside Professor Thibault. They'd probably glare at me and kick me out of the club. Wasn't worth the effort. In any case, Elijah had made a pact with a demon that was part of the Charm clan, a sub-branch of the demon clan of Lust. In exchange for selling his soul to the demon, he obtained his current appearance and an ability called Bewitchment, which was very similar to Donna's enchantment art. The only difference was that it only worked on females, whilst Donna's worked for anyone regardless of gender or race. Currently, his main goal should be Amanda. Being such a talented individual, alongside her impressive background, the demons highly coveted her. That was part of the reason why his contractor was a high-ranking demon within the Charm clan despite his talent being on the lower side. Since today is the first day, I'll do a brief introduction about myself and what the club consists of. His charming voice drifted across the classroom, pleasantly entering everyone's ears like it was a beautiful note from a fine-tuned instrument. Instantly the eyes of the female students started shining even brighter. In food exploration, we research and discuss monster and plant composition. We will look at which monsters and plants are edible, and how they benefit our bodies. The topics that we will cover in this course are monster identification, methods of cooking, poison extraction, what combinations were most optimal, and plant identification. It may sound boring and all, but don't worry, as that's just the boring part. Smiling brightly, Elijah looked at everyone in the class. As he was looking, his eyes slightly paused on Amanda, who was quietly listening to the lecture. Rolling my eyes, I scoffed at him. You think no one noticed you staring at Amanda? For the fun part, with the permission from the academy, we will be going to different places and taste amazing food. A wave of cheers instantly enveloped the class as the male students celebrated the fact that they were able to leave the academy, while the female students cheered for a different reason. Food exploration, as odd as it may sound, was one of the most sought-after courses for lower-end academies, as not only did it pay well, but it also didn't have as high of a risk compared to dungeon hunting. This was especially tempting for those who didn't have any combat talent, as despite lacking talent in combat, they could still be widely recognized and regarded by most people. The more famous chefs even had celebrity status that rivaled that of most S-ranked heroes. Walking towards the table that was neatly set up in front of the classroom, Elijah pulled his sleeve upwards. I'll show you guys a quick demonstration. Let's take a look at this steak. As I'm sure most of you know, this is the meat of a D-rank creature, Man-O-War horse. Tapping his ring twice, a large steak appeared on the table. The steak, which was the size of a wheel, had fine white threads of fat extending like a spiderweb all over the steak, reminding me of Wagyu steak. Just one look and it was enough for me to start salivating. Tapping on a button, a holographic image of a large horse popped up for everyone in the class to see. Just like its name suggested, the Man-O-War horse was an evolved version of a horse. Having an enormous body that was as tall as 3 people, the Man-O-War horse was an extremely strong D-rank monster. What made them troublesome was their ferocious and fearsome personalities that would cause them to attack anything at minimal provocation. As most of you probably know, the Man-O-War horse is an extremely hard creature to kill, let alone capture. If not for the fact that after careful research and analysis we found its weakness, this steak's value would already be in the 5 digits. As Elijah talked, a sudden wave of tiredness swept over me. It mostly had to do with the fact that I was overworking myself these days, but it also had to do with the fact that I already knew the contents of the lecture. Wawam. A yawn soon escaped from my mouth and the corners of my eyes teared up. The yawn, which was fairly loud, caused Elijah's eyebrows to slightly twitch. Soon every female in the class turned their heads in my direction and hatefully glared at me. It was like they were telling me, "How dare you interrupt our prince when he's speaking?" Honestly, I wouldn't even be surprised if they attacked me for real if I yawned one more time. The girls had fallen deep. Only Amanda kept her eyes on the hologram and ignored what was happening around her. Cough. Elijah let out a dry cough before continuing his explanation. Because of the food it consumes, which mainly consists of highly fatty food, the Man-O-War horse's meat as seen here is highly marbleized. Ding. Dong. 50 minutes have passed since then, and finally, the loud sound of the bells signaling the end of the lectures rang. Standing up, I packed up my stuff and prepared to leave. This time I held my impulse to yawn as I didn't want to get attacked by Elijah's crazy fangirls. You never know how scary fangirls were. I was on my way to the door when I saw Elijah approaching Amanda. My feet soon stopped. Junior Amanda. Here, this is a small gift for entering the elective. Taking out a small black object from his pocket, Elijah handed it to Amanda. As I focused a lot on Kevin in the novel, I didn't really know what happened in between the events that led to the incident between Elijah and Amanda, so what he was doing now and what the black box was I had no clue. But I knew he was scheming something. Rather than that being just a gift for joining the elective, Elijah probably handed her something valuable just to strike a good impression with her. Ah, yes, thank you. Amanda took the box and indifferently left the class. That seemed to be the end of their first encounter. Well, that was more anticlimactic than I expected. Was expecting something more entertaining, to be honest, but I guess Elijah was much more patient than I gave him credit for, as he just smiled as if nothing happened. Shaking my head, I walked out of the classroom. Well, not like I care anyways. All I cared about at the moment was getting stronger. As long as the plotline of the story didn't deviate too much from the main story, I couldn't care less about the minor details. Walking out of the classroom, I thought for a bit before deciding to go back to my dorm. I think I deserved a bit of rest. It wouldn't do me any good if I overworked myself. Click. Arriving in my dorm, I opened the door and entered. Pumph. Placing my keys on the wall hanger, I lazily slumped on the bed. Ding. Hearing the sound of a notification coming from my phone, I took my phone out and unlocked the screen. Class A25, A24, A23 announcement. Dear students, we will be going on an excursion 2 weeks from today. We will be going to Hallberg, and we will visit their famous monster processing plant. The trip will be approximately a week long and thus will require you to come prepared. Read more. Oof. Lazily throwing my phone on the bed, I couldn't help but feel a massive headache coming my way. 2 weeks from now our entire class will be going to Hallberg, a city 2 hours away from Ashton City. The goal of this trip was to let students see how monsters were processed and how they were used to create weapons and artifacts. It was a very useful class as it helped students understand some of the topics in class better. It was always easier to learn visually rather than theoretically. Too bad the trip was not as fun as it may seem on the surface. Thinking about the future that awaits me, a long tired sigh escaped from my mouth as I used my arm to cover my eyes. Let's just hope that I won't have to expose myself. Though I said that, my hopes were low. The trip was definitely one that I would have to participate in even if I didn't want to. Normally, in my previous world, in order to skip school, I could have faked a sickness or something. But here, the technology was so advanced that pretending to be sick wouldn't work. With a simple check, the doctor could immediately tell if someone was lying or not. Let's hope for the best.